Ruth Vaughn was halfway through dialysis when her daughter sent a photograph of the empty dining room. At first, Ruth thought Kathy was showing her how well the floor had cleaned up. The afternoon light came through the west window and fell across the red brick tiles. There was no table in the middle of the room. The pine cabinet Charles had built was gone from the far wall. Even the yellow curtains had been taken down. Under the photograph, Kathy had written, "Making good progress. Don't worry about anything." Ruth read the message twice. A clear tube carried her blood toward the dialysis machine beside her chair. Another tube brought it back. She kept her left arm still beneath the light blanket the clinic provided, though her hand had begun to tighten. She called Kathy. Her daughter answered over a noise of footsteps and scraping wood. "Hi, Mom. Everything's fine. Where's my table?" There was a pause. Kathy stepped away from the two men carrying the pine cabinet through the front door of the house at 418 Moore Road. She had expected gratitude, or at least relief. She hadn't expected Ruth to notice one table before seeing the larger sense of what Kathy believed she was doing. "It went with the dining set," Kathy said. "Went where?" "Eric found somebody who wanted it." Ruth looked toward the high clinic window. The glass showed a strip of hard blue New Mexico sky and the top of a cottonwood moving in the wind. "I used that table." "Mom, you can't take a dining table to supervised housing." The machine continued its soft, regular pumping. Ruth had heard Kathy mention supervised housing once. It had been presented as an option for later, after they knew whether dialysis would leave Ruth too tired to manage the house. Ruth had said she would think about it. Kathy had heard that as the beginning of consent. "I'm not moving," Ruth said. "Can we talk when you're done there?" "We're talking now." Kathy lowered her voice. "The buyer is coming, Friday. They want the place empty." "What buyer?" "Mom, what buyer, Kathy?" Across town, Eric came out of Ruth's bedroom carrying 2 cardboard boxes. He saw his sister near the front gate and knew from the way she held the phone that their mother had finally understood. He set the boxes beside his pickup. "She knows?" he asked. Kathy waved him away. Ruth heard him. "Is Eric there? He's helping." "Helping with what?" Kathy closed her eyes. She was 43, old enough to recognize when a plan had gone too far, and stubborn enough to keep pushing because stopping would mean admitting it. The house needed to be cleared. "You've been saying for months that you can't keep up with it." "I said the roof leaked over the back room. And the taxes are late. The plumbing freezes. The steps to the cellar aren't safe. You can't keep pretending none of that matters. I didn't ask you to empty my house. We're trying to keep you safe." Ruth looked down at the tape holding the needle lines in place. She had arrived at the clinic with a canvas bag containing a paperback, a bottle of water she wasn't supposed to drink too quickly, peppermints, and a clean pair of socks. Kathy had driven her because Ruth often felt weak afterward. Before they left the house, Kathy had asked for the spare key. "In case I need to pick up your medicine," she'd said. Ruth had handed it over without thinking. Now she asked, "Where is my husband's cabinet?" Kathy looked toward the pickup. The cabinet wasn't there. Eric sold it with the other furniture. Today? It's better than paying someone to haul everything away. Ruth felt heat move up her neck. The clinic was cool enough that several patients wore jackets, but sweat collected beneath her collar. "Put it back." "We can't." "Then go get it." The man already left. Ruth heard Eric again, closer now. "Tell her it covered the clean-out crew." "It did not cover the crew," Kathy said away from the phone. "It covered part of it." "Eric, stop!" Ruth knew that tone. Kathy used it when she wanted someone to be quiet without giving up what they had already done. She had used it as a girl when Eric broke a lamp and she tried to arrange the room so Ruth wouldn't notice. Back then, Kathy had believed that managing the evidence was the same as fixing the harm. "How much did he get?" Ruth asked. Kathy didn't answer. "How much?" "Mom, the furniture wasn't worth what you think. It was worth being mine." The woman in the next dialysis chair glanced over, then looked politely back at her television. Ruth lowered her voice. "Put my things inside, lock the door, bring me my key. The men are nearly finished." "Finished doing what?" The question came out louder than Ruth intended. Kathy walked back into the house. The living room held pale rectangles where furniture had protected the plaster from years of wood stove smoke. Charles's brown armchair was gone. The rug Ruth had bought at a church sale was rolled on the porch. A box near the door contained kitchen utensils, extension cords, and the ceramic rooster that had stood above the sink. Kathy saw the emptiness, and for the first time that day, felt something besides urgency. The house didn't look safer. It looked as if Ruth had already died. She bent and lifted the ceramic rooster from the box. "I saved your personal things," she said. "My personal things were all over that house. I mean, photographs, papers, clothes, things you'll actually need. Where are they?" "At my place. I made up the downstairs room for you." Ruth's mouth went dry. Kathy's house had a narrow downstairs room beside the laundry area. It held a folding bed, an exercise bicycle, and boxes of holiday decorations. Ruth had slept there for 2 nights after leaving the hospital that winter. Every time the washing machine entered its spin cycle, the bed trembled against the wall. "How long were you planning to keep me there?" "Until we found somewhere appropriate." "You already found somewhere. We toured it last week." "You toured it." "It has medical transport, meals, someone there all night." "And what does it cost?" The sale would cover a good part of it. Ruth watched the blood moving through the clear line. "The sale of my house." "Yes." "That I didn't agree to." Kathy pressed her fingers to her forehead. "You signed the form for the valuation." "I signed permission for someone to look at the roof and tell me what repairs would cost. It included an as-is offer. I didn't accept it. Not yet." That was the sentence that settled Ruth, not because it was the cruelest thing Kathy had said, but because Kathy spoke as if Ruth's answer were a delay in paperwork. Ruth had spent the first months after Charles died learning to live with silence. He had died in 2022 at 66, leaving his boots beside the back door and a row of seed trays under the kitchen window. For a while, Ruth still turned toward his chair when the evening news started. 4 years later, she no longer expected him to be there, but the house still held the order they had made together. Coffee mugs above the stove, towels in the second drawer, bills beneath the blue stoneware bowl. Kathy and Eric had treated that order as clutter. "Give the phone to Eric," Ruth said. "He's busy." "So am I." Kathy carried the phone outside. Eric wiped his hands on his jeans before taking it, though Ruth couldn't see that. At 40, he had perfected the habit of looking useful when he needed something forgiven. "Hey, Mom, who bought the cabinet?" "Some dealer from Santa Fe." "His name? I don't have it." "You took money from a man and don't know his name?" "It was through the clean-out guy." "How much?" Eric watched the workers load the rolled rug. He needed the money from the furniture for a credit card payment due the next morning. He'd told Kathy the sale proceeds would be put toward Ruth's expenses. He had meant to replace what he borrowed before anyone checked. "A few hundred for the lot," he said. "The lot?" "It was used furniture, Mom. Nobody pays for sentiment." Ruth closed her eyes. The dining table had marks from ordinary years. A dark circle where Charles once set down a hot saucepan. A shallow cut from the Christmas when Eric tried carving a roast before it had rested. Kathy's initials were scratched beneath one end, hidden there since she was grown enough to know better and young enough to do it anyway. Ruth didn't explain any of that. "Stop selling my things. We already did the main rooms." "Then stop now. The rest is mostly junk. If it's in my house, you ask me?" Eric's jaw shifted. "You want us to leave the cellar too?" "Because nobody wants those shelves of old jars." Ruth opened her eyes. "You went into the root cellar?" "Yeah. It's damp and half empty. We cleared the shelves by the steps." "What did you take?" "Rusty tools, empty crates, canning jars." "Charles kept seed jars down there. They looked old." "Did you open anything?" "No. Kathy said not to fool with the iron door." Ruth held on to that. The root cellar sat behind the house, built into the slope under the nursery plot. Its outer room had shelves for potatoes, canned fruit, and tools that needed cool storage. At the back stood an iron inner door Charles had installed years before. Ruth knew he used that part of the cellar, but she had never asked why he wanted an iron door inside a locked cellar. Charles had been particular about seeds, temperature, and mice. She had assumed the inner space held more of the same. "Is that door still locked?" she asked. "I guess. You guess?" "It was locked when we tried it." "We didn't try it," Kathy said beside him. Eric covered the phone. "You pulled the handle." "That's not trying it." Ruth could picture them standing in the cellar, Kathy worried about dirt on her shoes, Eric testing anything that might open. "Leave it alone," Ruth said, gladly, "and put back whatever is still on your truck." Eric looked at the boxes beside the tailgate. "We can't undo a whole day because you're upset. Watch me." The dialysis machine sounded an alarm. Ruth flinched, then raised her free hand. A technician came over and checked the line. "You all right, Ms. Vaughn?" My pressure dropped a little. It's been doing that near the end. Please finish the treatment. The technician adjusted the chair and asked Ruth to remain still. Ruth nodded. She was embarrassed by how badly her hands wanted to shake. Eric was saying something through the phone. She brought it back to her ear. What? I said, Kathy already put down a deposit on the room. Then Kathy can get it back. It may not be refundable. That's her problem. Mom, be reasonable. Ruth almost laughed. She didn't have the strength for it. Put my key on the kitchen counter? How are you getting in if we do that? I have my own key. Eric looked at Kathy. They had assumed the key on Kathy's ring was the only spare. Ruth kept another in the zippered pocket of her dialysis bag. Charles had made her carry it after she once locked herself out during a snowstorm. Fine, Eric said, but the buyer is still scheduled. No, you haven't even heard the offer. Then tell me. Eric handed the phone back to Kathy. Kathy spoke carefully. $38,000. As is. They'll take the tax problem and the repairs. Ruth knew the adobe needed work. The roof leaked. One bathroom pipe groaned when the temperature dropped. 2 property tax payments were late, and the notice on her desk gave her 30 days to bring them current. Still, $38,000 wouldn't buy another house in Las Vegas. After supervised housing took its monthly fee, it might not buy much time either. Who arranged it? Ruth asked. A local buyer through the valuation company. Give me the number. Why? Because I'm canceling Friday. Mom, just wait until we can sit down. No, you sat down without me. Ruth ended the call. For several seconds, she heard only the pump beside her and the televisions mounted above the clinic chairs. Then she opened her canvas bag with one hand. Beneath the socks and paperback, she found the little ring Charles had given her. House key, cellar key, shed key. 3 ordinary pieces of metal, each worn smooth at the edges. She held them in her palm. When treatment ended, standing took longer than she wanted. The technician waited nearby without touching her. Ruth put on her coat, tucked the keys into her pocket, and called the number Kathy had texted. A man answered on the 4th ring. This is Ruth Vaughn, she said. There will be no showing at 418 Mora Road on Friday. I own the house, and I have not agreed to sell it. The man began to explain what he had been told. Ruth let him finish. Now you've been told by me, she said. She ended the call, requested a ride, and sat near the clinic entrance with her bag on her knees. Kathy sent 3 messages. Eric sent none. Ruth didn't answer either of them. Outside, the afternoon had turned cold. Her body felt drained and heavy, but the spare key pressed against her leg through the lining of her coat. For the first time that day, one thing was exactly where she had left it. The ride was 6 minutes away when Kathy's car pulled to the curb. She got out without turning off the engine. Ruth could see her daughter had been crying, though Kathy had wiped her face and put on sunglasses. I came as soon as the clinic called. The clinic didn't call you. You list me as your emergency contact. I didn't have an emergency. The technician said your pressure dropped. It does that. Kathy took Ruth's bag before Ruth could object. This was how she helped. She reached first, decided quickly, and treated resistance as one more thing to carry. Ruth followed her to the car. My ride is coming. Cancel it. I've already paid. I'll reimburse you. That isn't the point. Kathy opened the passenger door. Please don't stand out here in the cold to prove something. Ruth looked at the clinic entrance. The technician behind the desk was watching through the glass. He wasn't staring exactly, but he knew Kathy picked Ruth up most treatment days. Ruth could wait for a stranger and make the whole thing awkward, or she could get into the warm car. She canceled the ride. The cancellation fee was $5. Kathy drove without speaking. At the first traffic light, she turned the heater higher and aimed the vent toward Ruth's hands. Ruth moved it away. You're cold, Kathy said. The air dries my eyes. Kathy adjusted it again, this time toward Ruth's feet. They passed the pharmacy where Kathy collected Ruth's prescriptions, then the grocery store where she bought food after treatment days. Over the previous year, Kathy had taken over dozens of small errands. At first she asked. Later, she simply announced what had been done. Ruth had thanked her every time. It had seemed unkind to say, I could have done that Thursday. It had seemed petty to say, please don't rearrange my appointments. It had seemed foolish to refuse help when walking from the clinic to the parking lot sometimes felt like crossing a field in deep mud. So, Ruth let Kathy keep the appointment cards. She let her speak to the pharmacy. She let her open mail while Ruth rested. Each favor was small enough to accept. Together, they had given Kathy a place in Ruth's life that looked very much like authority. "Take me home," Ruth said. "I'm taking you to my house." I said, "Home. You don't have a bed there." Ruth turned toward her. "What did you do with my bed? It's in storage. You said Eric sold the furniture, not your mattress. I had the movers keep that." "Where?" "A storage place off Mills Avenue." "Under whose name?" "Mine, because I had to sign for it." Ruth watched the streets go by. Kathy had an answer for everything, because she had arranged everything. The only person not included in the arrangement had been Ruth. "You'll stay with me tonight," Kathy said. "Tomorrow, after you've rested, we'll go over the offer." "There is no offer." "There is. You told the man not to come Friday. That doesn't make the paper disappear. It makes the showing disappear. For now." Kathy's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She was frightened, though she wouldn't call it that. Her mother's illness had made the future feel like something that had to be controlled before it got worse. If Ruth stayed in the adobe, Kathy pictured missed treatments, frozen pipes, and a fall on the cellar steps. She did not picture Ruth making coffee in her own kitchen. Fear had narrowed the house into a list of hazards. "You didn't ask me what I wanted," Ruth said. "I did ask." "When?" "After Christmas. I said we needed a plan. You said the roof needed a plan. I meant all of it. Then you should have said all of it. You would have put me off. That was my right." Kathy stopped at another light. "Do you know how many nights I've worried about you out there?" "No." "Exactly." Ruth looked at her. "You didn't tell me that either." The light changed. A driver behind them tapped his horn. Kathy drove on. Her house stood on a newer street with narrow yards and attached garages. The front porch had 2 chairs no one sat in because the wind blew directly across it. Kathy opened the garage door, drove inside, and waited until the door closed behind them. Ruth noticed 3 boxes against the wall. One was marked kitchen. Another said mom clothes. The third had Charles's name crossed out and 2 sort written beneath it. "You brought everything here?" "Everything important." "Who decided what was important?" Kathy didn't answer. Ruth got out slowly. Her knees felt hollow. She steadied herself against the car roof until the feeling passed. Kathy came around to help. "Don't. I'm not trying to control you. You've got my house in boxes. I'm trying to get you inside." Ruth let go of the car and walked to the kitchen door. Kathy stayed close but kept her hands down. The downstairs room looked worse than Ruth remembered. The exercise bicycle had been moved into the garage, making space for her bed. Someone had put a blue cover over it. Her nightstand stood beside the wall, but it held a lamp from Kathy's living room. A neat row of Ruth's clothes hung in the closet. On the dresser sat the ceramic rooster. Kathy had placed it there as if one familiar object could make the room familiar. "Your medicine is in the top drawer," she said. "I put a glass in the bathroom. There are clean towels." Ruth opened the closet. Kathy had chosen 6 dresses, 3 pairs of pants, sweaters, and the dark suit Ruth wore to funerals. Her work shirts were missing. So were her gardening shoes. "Where's the rest?" "Storage." "My gray shirt?" "I don't know which one you mean." "The heavy cotton one with the pearl snaps." "It may be in a box." Ruth closed the closet. She had worn that shirt when she and Charles cleaned the acequia each spring. It was stained at the cuffs and patched at one elbow. Kathy had probably seen damage. Ruth saw a shirt that could take another season of work. "Sit down," Kathy said. "I'll make tea. I want my papers." "What papers?" "The tax notice, the house insurance, the valuation form. They're upstairs. Bring them. After you eat. Now." Kathy stood in the doorway. For a moment, she looked like she might argue. Then she went upstairs. Ruth sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was hers, but the room smelled of laundry soap and the lavender plug-in Kathy kept near the bathroom. She could hear cabinet doors opening in the kitchen. The ceramic rooster faced her with one painted black eye. Ruth picked it up. Its base had been repaired with glue after Eric knocked it from the windowsill years earlier. She had told Charles not to throw it away. Charles had sat at the table with a toothpick, fitting the pieces together while Eric apologized from the kitchen doorway. Eric had always apologized easily. Paying for damage was harder. The door from the garage opened. "Where is she?" he asked. "In the downstairs room." Eric appeared carrying a paper sack of takeout containers. "I brought soup," he said. Ruth set down the rooster. "I want the name of the man who bought my furniture. I told you I don't have it. You have a phone. The clean-out guy arranged it. Call him. Eric set the bag on the dresser. Can we not do this right now? We're doing it. You just got out of treatment. That didn't stop you from selling it. He looked toward the hall for Kathy, but she was still upstairs. I was trying to help cover expenses. Which expenses? The movers, storage, everything Kathy's been paying. Kathy told me the furniture paid part of the crew. It did. How much did you receive? Eric rubbed the back of his neck. 700. For everything? It wasn't good stuff. How much did the crew cost? Kathy handled that. How much did you give her? He looked at the floor. Ruth understood before he spoke. I'm paying it back, he said. How much did you give her? Some of it went on my card. Your credit card. It was due. Ruth waited. Eric had expected shouting. Silence made him explain. The interest is killing me. I only needed it for a week. Once the house closes, I can straighten it out. The house isn't closing. Then I'll find another way. You sold my table to pay your debt. I borrowed the money. You borrowed something after you sold it without asking. He sat in the chair by the closet. I know how that sounds. It sounds accurate. Kathy returned with a folder pressed against her chest. She looked from Ruth to Eric. What did you tell her? The truth. Which part? Eric stood. I'm going to get the guy's number. Sit down, Kathy said. No, he can go, Ruth said. He has a call to make. Eric left the room. The garage door opened a moment later, then closed hard enough to rattle the lamp. Kathy put the folder beside Ruth. I didn't know he kept the money. You trusted him with my furniture. He said he knew a buyer. You trusted him because it made the job easier. Kathy sat where Eric had been. I'll replace the money. That won't bring back the table. We may be able to find it. We? Kathy looked down. Eric will find it. Ruth opened the folder. The first page was the as-is valuation. $38,000 appeared at the bottom. Beneath it was a line showing estimated taxes and fees. There was no purchase agreement, no accepted offer, no signature transferring anything. The second page was the form Ruth remembered signing. It authorized an inspection and valuation. It did not authorize Kathy to list the house, accept an offer, remove property, or make living arrangements. Ruth read it carefully. Kathy watched her reach the bottom. You see why I thought we were moving forward, she said. No. You signed it. I signed permission for a valuation. You knew selling was one possibility. A possibility isn't a decision. You always say you'll look at something later. Then later comes and you're too tired. Ruth turned the page. Kathy's words stung because they weren't entirely false. On treatment days, Ruth postponed decisions. On other days, she sometimes let the postponed pile remain where it was. Charles had handled the property taxes before he died. Afterward, Ruth paid them, but not always on time. The latest notice had sat unopened for nearly 2 weeks because she recognized the county return address and didn't want another problem that morning. She had believed family gave a person room to be tired. Instead, her silence had become a space Kathy filled. Where is the tax notice? Ruth asked. In the back. Ruth found it. The amount due was more than she had in checking, though she could cover it from savings if she delayed the roof repair. The deadline was 30 days from the date printed at the top. Why didn't you show me this? I put it on your desk. You opened it first. You asked me to check your mail after you were in the hospital. That was in February. I didn't know the permission expired. Now you do. Kathy's face changed. She had wanted Ruth to admit she needed help. Instead, Ruth had drawn a line through the middle of help and control, and Kathy didn't yet know which side she stood on. Ruth removed the tax notice, insurance papers, and valuation from the folder. Then she found the storage receipt. Kathy had paid for 1 month with her own card. I'll repay the storage charge, Ruth said. You don't have to. I do if my belongings are under your name. Mom, please. Tomorrow, we move them back. The house isn't ready. It was ready this morning. It was full this morning. It was home. Kathy stood and walked to the doorway. She gripped the frame, then released it. What do you want from me? The answer came too quickly to be honest. Ruth wanted Kathy to say she was sorry, bring back every chair, cancel every plan, and once again become the daughter who called before dropping by. That daughter had never quite existed. Kathy had always loved by organizing. Ruth had always accepted the organizing because it felt easier than asking for a different kind of care. I want my house key, Ruth said. Kathy reached into her purse. The spare key lay on a ring with a grocery tag and a small silver cross. She worked it loose and set it in Ruth's hand. Ruth added it to the 3 keys in her pocket. "Thank you." Kathy stared at her. She had expected triumph or anger. Ruth's plain thanks made the return feel official. "You shouldn't stay alone tonight," she said. "I'm staying here tonight." Kathy relaxed slightly. "Tomorrow is different," Ruth added. She gathered the papers, placed them inside her canvas bag, and pulled the zipper closed. The house was still empty. Her furniture was still scattered, and Dialysis had left her too tired to climb the stairs. But the sale had no signature. The deadline had a date, and every key to 418 Mora Road was back in her possession. The next morning, Ruth called the storage place before Kathy came downstairs. A woman confirmed there was 1 unit under Kathy's name. The first month had been paid, and access required Kathy's identification or written permission. Ruth thanked her and hung up. Kathy entered the kitchen in slippers and a robe. She stopped when she saw Ruth dressed at the table. "You're up early. I need you to sign permission at the storage office. Can you eat first?" "I already ate." On the table sat an empty oatmeal bowl and the pills Ruth took with breakfast. She had found them in the drawer exactly where Kathy said they would be. Kathy poured coffee. "You should wait until tomorrow. You always need a day after treatment. I need a day when nobody makes plans for me. I'm not making plans." "Then put on your shoes." They reached the storage office shortly after it opened. Kathy signed the access form, and Ruth paid the next month in advance with her debit card. The clerk handed her a gate code and a second key. Kathy watched the key disappear into Ruth's purse. "You don't need to pay 2 months. I need access while my things are here. I could have brought you any time." "That's not access." The unit stood near the back of the property. When Kathy rolled up the metal door, Ruth saw her life stacked to the ceiling. Her bed frame leaned along one wall. Boxes filled the middle. Charles's chair sat upside down on top of 2 dressers. The kitchen table was not there. Neither was the pine cabinet. Ruth walked between the boxes, reading labels. Some were clear: linens, dishes, bathroom. Others carried only question marks. A black plastic bag held her work shirts. She pulled out the gray cotton one and shook it open. Kathy had washed it before packing it. The patch on the elbow had started to lift. "I was going to mend that," Kathy said. "You were going to throw it away. I put it in storage, after I asked where it was." Kathy turned toward the boxes. "What do you want to take today?" "The bed, kitchen things, towels, my clothes. That won't fit in my car." "I know." Ruth took out her phone and called Gary Webb. She hadn't spoken with him for several weeks, though she could see the upper rows of his orchard from her back window. Gary had worked beside Charles along the Acequia for years. Since Charles died, he checked the shared headgate after storms and left notes in Ruth's mailbox when water was due. He answered with machinery running behind him. "Morning, Ruth. Are you using your flatbed today?" "Not until after lunch. I need help moving a bed from storage." The machinery stopped. "Where are you moving it? Home?" Gary was quiet long enough to understand there was more behind the request. He didn't ask for the whole story. "Give me the address," he said. Kathy folded her arms after Ruth ended the call. "You called Gary before asking me. You already said it wouldn't fit." "I could arrange a mover. So could I." Gary arrived 40 minutes later in a faded green pickup with a small flatbed trailer. He wore work gloves tucked into his back pocket and a cap stained around the brim. He looked from the storage unit to Kathy, then back to Ruth. "Morning." "Thank you for coming," Ruth said. "No trouble." Kathy gave him a tight smile. "We're still working out what goes where." "The bed goes to my bedroom," Ruth said. Gary nodded once. "That narrows it down." They loaded the bed frame, mattress, nightstand, 2 chairs, and 6 boxes. Ruth wanted more, but Gary checked the trailer straps and told her that another load would ride better than one overloaded trip. "I'll pay you for fuel," Ruth said. "We'll settle later. We'll settle today." Gary glanced at Kathy, who pretended to study a label on a box. $10 should cover it, he said. Ruth gave him 20. He started to return half. "You left your pruning to come here. That doesn't burn fuel. It burns mourning." He accepted the money. Kathy drove Ruth while Gary followed. As they turned onto Moore Road, Ruth saw the adobe roof above the bare cottonwoods. The house looked unchanged from a distance. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but the brown walls held the same morning light they had held the day before. Closer, the damage became visible. The clean-out crew had left scratches on the front door. One porch post had a fresh chip. Flattened cardboard lay against the fence, caught there by the wind. Kathy parked, but didn't get out. "I have to work," she said. "You knew we were coming here. I thought Gary was unloading." "He is. You don't need 3 people to carry a mattress." Ruth opened her door. Kathy leaned across the console. "Are you staying?" "Yes." "Tonight?" "Yes. There's no food. I brought food." "You brought oatmeal and canned soup. That's food. What if your pressure drops again?" "I'll sit down." "This is exactly what I mean. You make everything sound simple. Some things are simple." Kathy looked at Gary's truck waiting behind them. "You're doing this to punish me." "No. I'm going inside my house." Ruth stepped out and closed the door. Kathy remained at the curb until Gary began untying the mattress. Then she drove away. The house key turned easily. Ruth pushed the door open and entered first. Cold air met her in the front room. The crew had switched off the wall heaters. Without furniture, every footstep returned from the plaster walls. Gary carried in the nightstand. "Where do you want it?" "Beside the bed." He looked toward the hall. "They leave the bed frame slats? They're on the trailer." "Good. Those old frames use an odd width." Ruth knew that. Charles had rebuilt the frame after one side split, and he had cut the slats himself. A mover might have discarded them as scrap. Ruth had checked before leaving storage. She opened the bedroom curtains while Gary brought in the pieces. Dust marked the places where the dressers had stood. The closet was empty, except for wire hangers and one of Charles's old belts that had fallen behind a box. Ruth picked it up and laid it across the nightstand. Gary assembled the bed without conversation. Ruth held the frame steady while he fitted the last slat. Her arms tired quickly, but she didn't let go until he told her it was secure. When the mattress was in place, she sat on it. The springs shifted beneath her. It was a small sound, but it belonged in that room. Gary went to check the heaters. A moment later, he called from the hall. "Ruth, did they turn off your water?" "I don't know. The kitchen faucet produced nothing." Gary checked the bathroom, then walked outside to the main shutoff. He returned with damp dirt on one knee. "Valve's closed. Can you open it?" "I can. Let me check the sinks first." They made sure every faucet was off. The washing machine hoses had been disconnected and capped. Gary opened the main valve slowly. Water moved through the walls with a low shudder. The kitchen faucet coughed air, then ran brown for several seconds before clearing. Ruth held a glass beneath it. "There," she said. Gary listened instead of answering. A tapping sound came from the back room. They found water dripping from the ceiling into a metal light fixture. It struck the glass cover, gathered at one edge, and fell onto the bare floor. Gary switched off the breaker to that room. "The roof leak reached the wiring," he said. "It didn't do that last week." "Maybe not. Could be the crew disturbed something upstairs. Could be the last snow got under the flashing." "Can it wait?" "The roof can wait a little. The wet fixture can't." Ruth looked at the water spreading across the floor. The back room had held Charles's workbench, seed trays, and 2 storage cabinets. All were gone except the workbench, which had been too heavy for the crew. Its drawers stood open. Ruth got a bucket from the shed. Gary placed it under the drip, then removed the fuse for that circuit from the old panel so no one could switch it on by mistake. "You'll need an electrician before using that room," he said, "and the roof." "What would you do first?" "Stop the water, then see what got wet." Ruth took the tax notice from her bag. "I have 30 days on this." Gary read the date, but not the amount. "That explains the quick buyer." Kathy showed them the notice. "Did you agree to sell?" "No." "Then 30 days is still time. It doesn't feel like much. It never does when a county prints it in red." Gary handed back the paper. He walked to the window overlooking the nursery plot. Beyond the fence, the shallow acequia ran along Ruth's boundary before turning toward his orchard. "If this place changes hands, I need to know," he said. "Why?" "The maintenance gate is on your parcel. Charles and I always treated it as shared access." "Because it is. We knew that. A buyer may want proof before letting me bring equipment through." Ruth looked toward the gate. Charles had built it wide enough for Gary's small tractor. In spring, the 2 men cleared weeds and silt together. After Charles died, Gary continued the work and never sent Ruth a bill. "I'm not selling," she said. "Good. You sound relieved." "I've got 300 trees that like that answer." It was the first time anyone had given Ruth a reason for keeping the house that had nothing to do with memory or illness. Her property still did something. Water crossed it. Work depended on it. A neighboring orchard had planned its season around continued access. That knowledge brought responsibility with it. "When do you clean the ditch?" she asked. "Next week if the weather holds. I'll make sure the gate is open." Gary studied her face. "You don't need to be out there with a shovel. I said I'd open the gate. Then I'll bring the coffee." They unloaded the remaining boxes. Ruth put sheets on the bed while Gary checked the windows and relit the wall heaters. One worked. The other gave off a burnt smell, so he shut it down. "You can heat the bedroom and kitchen," he said. "Close the doors to the other rooms tonight. I've slept in colder houses. That doesn't make this one warm." He wrote the name of an electrician on the back of an envelope. The woman had repaired wiring at his packing shed and wouldn't replace what could safely be fixed. After Gary left, Ruth opened the kitchen boxes. Kathy had packed 1 saucepan, 2 plates, 4 mugs, and almost every serving bowl. She had packed the electric mixer but not the coffee filter holder. Ruth found it in a box marked Garage. By noon, she had coffee brewing. She drank half a cup, then rested at the kitchen counter until the weakness in her legs passed. The root cellar key lay beside the sugar bowl. Eric's comment had stayed with her. He had said they cleared shelves by the steps. Then he had called the cellar half empty. Those descriptions didn't match what Ruth remembered. The outer room had been crowded with crates, jars, tools, and sacks of soil mix. If the crew had removed enough to make it half empty, they had taken more than junk from the first shelves. Ruth put on her gray work shirt, carried a flashlight outside, and crossed the nursery plot. The cellar's wooden outer door had been left unlocked. That alone confirmed someone had been careless. Charles always locked it, even in winter. Inside, the air smelled of dirt and old wood. The shelves nearest the steps were bare. Dust showed clean circles where jars had stood. Several broken labels lay on the floor. Farther back, a row of empty crates remained beneath the iron inner door. The door was narrower than Ruth remembered. Rust marked the lower hinge, but the lock looked solid. She tried the cellar key. It didn't fit. Ruth crouched carefully and shone the flashlight along the threshold. A thin current of cold air moved across her fingers from beneath the iron door. The outer cellar was cold, but this draft was sharper. It carried a dry smell, faintly like the paper packets Charles kept in the kitchen. Something clicked beneath Ruth's shoe. She moved her foot and found a small brown jar lying on its side behind a crate. The crew must have missed it. Its metal lid was sealed with wax. A white label bore Charles's handwriting, followed by a set of letters and marks Ruth didn't understand. She carried the jar outside and locked the wooden door behind her. At the kitchen table, she wiped the dust from the glass. Inside were flat, pale seeds. The label wasn't a garden note. Charles had written carefully enough for someone else to read it. Ruth turned the jar toward the window and copied every mark onto the back of Gary's envelope. Then she placed the jar beside the tax notice, picked up the phone, and began looking for the organization named in small print along the bottom of the label. The name led her to a plain website with photographs of chili plants, drying racks, and shelves of labeled envelopes. The Southwest Heritage Seed Conservancy had a telephone number beneath its address. Ruth called. A woman answered and asked what kind of seed she wanted to donate. "I don't know if I'm donating anything," Ruth said. "I found a jar with your name on it. Is there an accession number? There are letters and numbers. I'm not sure which is which." "Read the whole label to me." Ruth read Charles's marks from the envelope. The woman asked her to repeat the final 2 letters, then placed her on hold. Ruth waited at the table with the jar between her hands. She could hear the wall heater clicking in the next room. A different woman came on the line. "This is Sherry Singh. I direct the conservancy. Did you say the label is handwritten?" "Yes." "Could you send me a photograph of the front, the lid, and whatever is inside?" "I can try." Ruth took 3 pictures. The first blurred because the phone focused on the kitchen window. She moved the jar onto a dish towel and tried again. Sherry received them, while Ruth remained on the line. "Don't break the wax," she said. "I wasn't planning to." "Good. Where did you find this?" "In my root cellar." "Was it stored in a sealed cabinet?" "It was outside a locked iron door." Sherry went quiet. Ruth heard computer keys. "Is Charles Vaughn your relative?" Sherry asked. "He was my husband." "I'm sorry. When did he die?" 4 years ago. "Mrs. Vaughn, the mark on that jar matches the way Charles labeled material he registered with us. A picture can't authenticate the seeds, but the label looks consistent." "What did he register?" "A Chimayo Chile line. He was selecting for dry conditions and shorter irrigation cycles." Ruth looked through the kitchen window toward the nursery plot. Charles had grown chilies every summer. He kept notes on clipboards, tied colored string around certain plants, and complained when birds reached the pods before he did. Ruth had understood that he was improving seed. She had not known anyone beyond the valley kept a record of it. He told me the plants use less water, she said. That was the goal. Do you remember him sending us packets? He mailed seed all the time. Sherry searched again. We have correspondence under his accession number. The last complete update in our registry was several years before he died. After that, his notes referred to a private preservation set. Behind the iron door? I can't tell you that. The answer disappointed Ruth, but its honesty made her trust Sherry more. What can you tell me? The jar appears connected to real work. That doesn't mean the seed is still alive. It doesn't tell us how much material exists. It also doesn't tell us who owns any commercial rights. They were my husband's seeds in my cellar. That establishes where you found this jar. An agreement needs more than that. What kind of agreement? Sherry hesitated. Could I come see the jar? You're asking to come to my house? If you're comfortable with that, I'd rather examine it before saying more. Ruth looked around the empty kitchen. 2 mugs stood on the counter. A box of serving bowls remained open by the wall. She did not want a stranger seeing what her children had done. She also did not want to carry a sealed jar into town on a dialysis day. When? I can be in Las Vegas tomorrow morning. Ruth agreed to 10 o'clock. After the call, she placed the jar in the blue stoneware bowl where she and Charles used to keep bills. Then she phoned the electrician whose number Gary had written on the envelope. The electrician could come late that afternoon. The roof would need someone else, but the backroom circuit could be inspected for a service fee Ruth could afford. Ruth made the appointment. By the time the electrician arrived, Gary had returned with a sheet of heavy plastic and 2 narrow boards. He covered the wet section of the roof as a temporary measure while Ruth remained on the ground and held the ladder steady. The electrician found water in the light fixture, but no fire damage. She removed it, capped the wires, and told Ruth not to restore power to that room until the ceiling dried. That buys you time, she said. It doesn't fix the leak. Time cost Ruth less than a full repair, so she paid the bill and kept the receipt. Gary climbed down from the roof as the electrician drove away. Plastic should hold unless the wind gets under it, he said. How much do I owe you? Nothing. You bought the plastic. I had it in the packing shed. I still owe you for the work. You can help with the Acequia gate next week. I was already doing that. Then make coffee? Ruth gave him a look. Gary smiled. 2 cups, strong. She accepted the terms. Before leaving, he glanced at the jar in the stoneware bowl. That from the cellar? Yes. You open it? No. Charles used to get annoyed when people opened seed jars in damp weather. Did he ever tell you what was behind the iron door? No. I helped him carry insulation down there once. He said he needed steady temperature. That's all. When was that? Long time ago. Before he got sick? Years before. Gary didn't try to improve his answer. He had known Charles's work habits, not his private plans. Ruth appreciated the distinction. Someone from the Conservancy is coming tomorrow, she said. Gary looked again at the jar. Then I'd leave it sealed. The temporary roof covering held through the night. The bedroom stayed warm with the door closed. Ruth slept in her own bed and woke twice to listen for dripping. At 9 the next morning, she swept the kitchen and unpacked 4 more boxes. She set Charles's belt in the bedroom drawer. She washed the 2 mugs. Then she changed out of her work shirt because she didn't want Sherry mistaking dust for neglect. At 10 past 10, a gray car stopped by the front gate. Sherry Singh carried a hard-sided case and a slim binder. She was 49, with dark hair pulled into a low knot, and reading glasses hanging from a cord. She wiped her shoes carefully before entering. "Thank you for letting me come," she said. Ruth led her to the kitchen. Sherry did not comment on the empty rooms. She put on thin gloves and examined the jar beneath a small light from her case. She studied the handwriting, wax, glass, and lid, without opening anything. "This jar is older than the label," she said. "Charles reused good jars. That sounds like him." "You knew him?" "Mostly through letters and seed packets. We met at 2 field days. He didn't say much in person. He saved it for paper." Sherry smiled. "That also sounds like him." She opened the binder. Inside were photocopies of forms bearing the same accession marks as the jar. Charles's name appeared beside rows of handwritten observations. Ruth recognized his writing at once. Sherry placed 1 page beside the sealed jar. "The mark is genuine. she said. "The sequence matches our registry, and the handwriting matches his submissions. I'm comfortable confirming that this was part of his registered work." Ruth sat back. The jar no longer looked like something the crew had overlooked. It belonged to a record that existed outside the house, one Kathy and Eric could not sort into a trash pile. "How much is it worth?" Ruth asked. "This jar by itself?" "Yes, very little." The answer landed plainly. Sherry took off her glasses. "A small sample can be useful for research. It isn't enough for commercial propagation, and we don't know whether these seeds will germinate." "Then why did you drive here?" "Because Charles referred to a complete preservation collection. If that still exists, if it remained dry, and if the later seed matches the traits in our registry, that is different." "How different?" Sherry folded her gloves on the table. "The Conservancy has been looking for drought-hardy regional stock for a grower program. We have funding approved for propagation and limited licensing. A complete viable collection with breeding records could support an agreement worth $210,000. Ruth looked at her to make sure she had heard correctly. "For seeds. For a preserved line, its records, and the right to propagate it under agreed terms. But I need to be careful. I have not seen a collection. I have not tested a seed. I have not seen proof that you own the rights. Right now, I can authenticate one label." Ruth put both hands around her mug. "What proof would you need?" "Charles's accession register would show how the jars connect. Cultivation notes would show the line's development. For ownership, we would need something assigning the collection and its rights, or clear estate records showing where they went. My husband left the house to me. That may help. It may not answer the rights question by itself." Ruth did not like the uncertainty, but she understood it. A house held many things that did not automatically become the same kind of property. "What about the seeds behind the door?" "We don't know there are seeds behind it. The draft smells like paper packets. That suggests dry storage, nothing more." "Can you open the door?" "No. Can Gary? Possibly, but I wouldn't force it yet." "Why not?" "If the frame shifts, if water gets in, or if there is a sealed environment behind it, a careless opening could damage what you're trying to examine. First, stabilize the outer cellar, then find the key, then open it with witnesses and a plan for moving anything vulnerable." Ruth looked toward the back of the house. "What does stabilize mean? Dry roof, sound door frame, no standing moisture, and somewhere safe to place material if the chamber has to be emptied." Each item meant work. Work meant money. Sherry wrote a short list on Conservancy letterhead. She included the registry number, her confirmation that the outer jar's accession mark was genuine, and the conditions required before further evaluation. At the bottom, she wrote her direct telephone number. "This is not a valuation," she said. "It is confirmation that your jar is connected to Charles's registered line. It's more than I had yesterday." "Yes. Can I keep the registry copy?" "I brought this copy for you." Ruth ran a finger near Charles's handwriting without touching the ink. One entry mentioned reduced water during a hot season. Another referred to a later set stored privately. Charles had made the notes while living in the same house with her. He had never hidden the work exactly. Ruth simply hadn't asked what all the marks meant. "Why didn't he finish this with you?" she asked. "I don't know. His last letter said the collection needed one more stable cycle. Then we didn't hear from him. That would have been before his health declined." Ruth remembered the season when Charles stopped planting the full nursery plot. She had assumed he was letting the ground rest. Sherry packed her light and gloves. "Keep the jar somewhere dry and steady, not in direct sun. Don't refrigerate it unless we know how it was conditioned. I'll leave it in the pantry. That should be fine for now." At the front door, Sherry paused. "If there is a full collection, we will deal directly with whoever owns it." Ruth heard the emphasis. "Not with my daughter, not unless you authorize her." "I don't, then I won't." Sherry left just as Kathy turned into the drive. Her car slowed beside the gray one. The two women exchanged polite nods through their windows. Kathy parked near the porch and watched Sherry place the hard-sided case in her trunk. "Who was that?" she asked after Sherry drove away. "Someone who knew Charles's seed work." Kathy looked past Ruth into the kitchen. The jar stood in the stoneware bowl beside the Conservancy binder. "What did she want?" "To examine something I found." "In the cellar?" Ruth did not answer. Kathy stepped toward the door, then stopped when Ruth remained in the opening. "I brought groceries," she said. "You can bring them in." Kathy picked up 2 bags from her car. Ruth moved aside, but only after her daughter had asked to enter. In the kitchen, Kathy saw the conservancy letter. She read the heading before Ruth turned it face down. Is this worth money? One jar isn't. That's not what I asked. It's the answer I have. Kathy set the groceries on the counter. Her gaze moved from the letter to the locked pantry where Ruth had placed the jar. We need to talk before Eric hears about this, she said. Ruth understood then that the house was no longer the only thing her children might try to manage. Kathy pulled out a chair, but Ruth remained standing. Does Eric know about the jar? Ruth asked. Not from me. Then why did you mention him? Because he'll hear eventually. From whom? Gary knows someone came out here. People talk. Gary doesn't. You don't know that. I know him well enough. Kathy opened one grocery bag and removed eggs, bread, and a container of chicken. She arranged them in the refrigerator, as if the conversation might become easier if her hands stayed busy. What did the conservancy say? They confirmed Charles's marking. On one jar. Yes. And there may be more. There may be nothing. Kathy closed the refrigerator. If there's nothing, why are you being secretive? I'm not being secretive. I'm being careful. I can help with that. How? I can organize the paperwork, schedule repairs, talk to the conservancy. They said they'll talk to me. Of course they will. I mean, I can take some of it off you. Ruth recognized the offer. It had the same shape as the offer to collect prescriptions, open mail, and arrange evaluation. No, she said. Kathy waited for the reason. Ruth gave her none. You don't even know what needs doing, Kathy said. I have a list. Can I see it? No. The refusal was small, but Kathy's face tightened. You're acting like I'm trying to steal from you. You emptied my house. I made a mistake. You made a plan. I was scared. So you chose for me. I'm trying to fix it now. Then find the dining table. Kathy looked toward the pantry. Is that the only way I'm allowed to help? It's the help I asked for. Kathy picked up her purse. I have calls to make. Make that one first. After she left, Ruth took Sherry's list from the binder. Dry roof, sound door frame, no standing moisture, safe temporary storage. Ruth could not afford all of it at once. The tax notice sat beneath the list, still counting down. She called Sherry. If I pay to repair the cellar, Ruth asked, and the collection belongs to someone else, what happens? Who else do you think might own it? My children think anything Charles left should be divided. Was his estate settled? The house came to me. There wasn't much else. That doesn't answer the seed rights. What would? A signed assignment, a contract, or estate paperwork that specifically addresses them. His register may also state who controlled the collection. We won't know until the chamber is opened. So I have to spend money before I know. You need to prevent damage. You do not need to make the cellar beautiful. Ruth looked at the water stain above the back room. How little can I do? Keep rain out. Make sure the iron door stays supported. Prepare clean, dry boxes in case material has to be moved. And then we examine what is there, if anything. Sherry never softened the last 3 words. Ruth thanked her and called Gary. He came over after lunch with a level, a pry bar, and a moisture meter borrowed from the packing shed. Wind had lifted one corner of the plastic on the roof. He secured it again, then walked with Ruth to the root cellar. The outer wooden door opened with a scrape. Ruth switched on the battery lantern she had brought from the shed. Gary stood on the second step and looked down. They cleared more than the front shelves. Eric said only the shelves by the steps. Those crates used to reach the other wall, you remember? I helped Charles move them after harvest. What was in them? Mostly trays and empty jars, some hand tools. Nothing valuable, not to me. He descended and examined the bare shelf boards. Dust lines showed where containers had stood. Near the back, he pressed the moisture meter against the plaster. Outer walls damp, he said, not soaked. He checked both sides of the iron door. The lower frame had pulled away from the surrounding plaster by the width of a coin. Rust colored the crack. That's your draft, he said. So, there may not be a room behind it. There's a room. I saw Charles building the insulated wall. You never went inside? No. Why not? He didn't ask. Ruth held the lantern closer as Gary crouched near the frame. He trusted you with the acequia. That was shared work. Seeds were his. He never mentioned the conservancy. He said he traded stock with growers. I didn't know there was an organization keeping records. Gary ran the level against the frame. The door itself is square. The plaster around it settled. If somebody pulls hard before this side is braced, the lower hinge could tear loose. Can you brace it? Yes, but first we need to know why this wall is damp. They went outside and climbed the slope above the cellar. The ground dipped near the back corner. Dead weeds and broken cardboard had packed into a shallow drainage channel. Gary pulled away the cardboard. Beneath it, the soil was soft. The runoff should go around the cellar, he said. This is sending it straight down the wall. Can we clear it? With a shovel. Ruth brought two from the shed. Gary took the heavier one. Ruth used the narrow spade Charles had sharpened every spring. She worked slowly. After several minutes, her shoulders began to ache. Gary cleared most of the packed soil, but Ruth cut the channel along the cellar wall and carried loose weeds to the compost pile. Neither told the other to stop. When the channel opened, a thin stream of trapped water moved away from the cellar and toward the lower nursery plot. Gary followed it, cutting one more shallow turn so it would not wash across the acequia path. That should help before the rain, he said. What rain? Tomorrow night. Maybe the next day too. Ruth looked at the open ground above the cellar. Will the plastic hold? On the house. The cellar roof is earth. We need to cover this corner until the channel dries. They spread another sheet of plastic over the slope and held it with stones. Ruth carried the smaller rocks. Gary moved the larger ones. When they returned inside, the air near the iron door felt less damp than the outer wall, though the cold draft still reached beneath it. Gary found a narrow metal tube running upward beside the frame. It disappeared into the ceiling. What is that? Ruth asked. A vent. For the cellar? Not this side. It goes through the wall. They went outside again and searched the slope. Behind a clump of dry grass, Ruth found the end of the tube beneath a small metal cap. Fine wire mesh covered the opening. It was dusty, but intact. Gary removed leaves from around it. Charles built airflow into the inner room, he said. That took planning. Does it mean the room stayed dry? It means he tried to keep it dry. That was useful and no more than useful. Ruth had begun to understand why Sherry spoke so carefully. They returned to the iron door. Gary measured the gap and wrote the dimensions on Sherry's list. I can brace the frame tomorrow morning, he said. Lumber will cost something. Not much. I'll pay for it. I know. What about opening it? Not tomorrow. Because of the frame? Because you don't have the key. Ruth took out her ring. Gary tried the cellar and shed keys without forcing them. Neither entered the iron lock. Charles kept extra keys in the workbench, he said. The drawers are open. Did you check underneath them? No. They walked back to the house. The workbench stood in the rear room beneath the damp ceiling. With the circuit shut off, they used the battery lantern. The top drawer slid out completely. Behind it lay sawdust, two washers, and a folded strip of paper. Ruth unfolded it. The paper held a list in Charles's handwriting. Most entries were ordinary supplies: wax, labels, silica packets, new mesh for vent. At the bottom, he had written, "Move reserve after final drying." There was no date and no key. Gary removed the second drawer. A row of hooks had been screwed beneath the bench top. One held a small tag made from a flattened piece of metal. Charles had stamped 2 letters into it, but the hook itself was empty. He kept a key there, Gary said. You saw it? I saw keys under this bench. I can't tell you which one hung on that hook. Ruth touched the empty hook. The clean-out crew had opened every drawer. If a key had been hanging there, it might be in a box at storage. It might have been sold with the tools. It might have gone into the trash. The useful result of searching the bench was not the key. It was confirmation that Charles had treated the inner room as a reserve, with drying materials and its own vent. Whatever he moved there had required more care than ordinary garden supplies. The cost was that Ruth now had another place to search and less time before rain. Her phone rang in the kitchen. Eric's name appeared on the screen. Ruth let it ring twice before answering. I need to come by, he said. Why? Kathy told me about the seed people. She said she wasn't going to. She didn't. I called her about the furniture, and she was acting strange. So you kept asking. She said there may be a collection. She doesn't know that. Neither do you. That's true. Eric seemed unprepared for agreement. Then nobody should touch anything until we figure out who it belongs to, he said. Ruth looked through the doorway. Gary stood beside Charles's workbench, replacing the drawers. I'm preventing water damage, she said. Using whose money? Mine. You shouldn't spend a lot on something that may be part of Dad's estate. I'm repairing my cellar. If the seeds are his, Kathy and I have an interest. You didn't have an interest when you were clearing the shelves? We didn't know. Ruth heard what he meant. The seeds mattered now, because someone outside the family had recognized them. What happened to the jars the crew removed? She asked. I told you. They went with the clean-out. Where? Some were recycled. Some may still be at the guy's place. Get them back. If they were empty, what difference does it make? You don't know they were empty. Eric lowered his voice. I'll ask. But I want to be there when that door is opened. No date has been set. Then don't set one without me. That isn't your decision. If there's something of Dad's behind there, it affects both of us. Ruth looked at the tax notice on the table. Eric had not offered to repay the furniture money before speaking about his share of a room no one had opened. Find the jars, she said. Find the key. Find my table. Then we can discuss what you've done, not what you expect. She ended the call. Gary came into the kitchen. He heard? He asked. Yes. From Kathy? Through Kathy. Gary picked up the conservancy list. You still want the frame braced? Ruth looked at the weather forecast on her phone, then at the 30-day notice. Yes. Only what protects the room. Nothing we can't afford to lose. Gary nodded. Ruth called the storage office and confirmed she could enter the unit without Kathy. The gate code worked until 9 that evening. She put Charles's supply list inside the binder and changed her objective for the next morning. Before she paid for anything beyond the brace, she would search every box her children had packed and find out what else they had removed from the house. Gary arrived at 8 with the trailer and enough lumber to brace the cellar frame. Ruth brought the storage key, the gate code, and 2 empty boxes for anything that should return directly to the house. The gate opened on the first try. That's one thing working, Gary said. Don't frighten it. At the unit, Ruth rolled the metal door above her head. Her shoulders protested before it reached the top. Gary took the handle and pushed it the rest of the way. They began with the boxes marked to sort. The first held old telephone books, extension cords, and 3 of Charles's caps. The second contained receipts, plant catalogs, and envelopes with no papers inside. Ruth kept the catalogs because Charles had written notes in the margins. The third box held tools. Gary lifted out a hand drill, pruning shears, and a metal tin that once contained cookies. Inside were screws, bits of chalk, hinges, and keys without labels. Ruth spread the keys on top of a dresser. There were 7. 2 were small cabinet keys. 3 looked like padlock keys. 1 belonged to an old truck Charles had sold years earlier. The last was short, heavy, and dark with age. Could that fit the iron door? Ruth asked. It could fit any old warded lock. You've seen it before? Maybe. Charles kept a lot of keys. Gary turned it over. A faint line crossed one side where something had rubbed the metal. Ruth found the flattened tag beneath a layer of screws. It bore the same 2 stamped letters as the tag under the workbench. The wire that had joined them was broken. Gary held the key beside the tag. That's likely the one from the hook, he said. Likely? I won't promise what I can't remember. Ruth joined them with a twist tie from her purse and placed the key in the zippered pocket with her house papers. They continued searching. A box marked pantry held canning rings and folded dish towels. Another contained the coffee grinder Eric claimed had been sold. Ruth wrapped it in a towel and put it in one of the empty boxes. Near the back, Gary uncovered 4 shallow cultivation trays. Charles's initials were burned into the wooden ends. The clean-out crew had stacked paint cans on top of them. Ruth moved the cans aside. Those go home. Gary inspected a cracked corner. I can repair this. I can repair it. Then I'll stay out of trouble. The trays were ordinary and worn. They were also the size of the shelves shown in one of the photographs on the Conservancy website. Ruth had watched Charles fill them with soil hundreds of times without thinking about why he numbered each row. Finding them changed nothing legally. It did show that the equipment listed in Charles's supply note had not all disappeared. A car stopped outside the unit. Kathy came through the open door with her purse over one shoulder. The storage office emailed me that the gate code was used. Ruth kept sorting. You gave me access. I didn't say you couldn't come. I wanted to know why you didn't tell me. Because I didn't need a ride. Kathy looked at Gary. You could have asked me to help. I asked you to find the table. I'm working on it. Did you find it? The dealer took it to Santa Fe. Eric is trying to get an address. Ruth set aside a stack of folded garden cloth. What do you know about this key? Kathy looked at it in Ruth's hand. Nothing. It hung under Charles's workbench. I didn't know he kept keys there. Do you remember the iron door being installed? Kathy's attention moved to the trays. Why? Because you told Eric not to touch it. I knew Dad kept it locked. How? Kathy pressed her lips together. Ruth waited. I saw him install it, Kathy said. Gary stopped moving boxes. You saw the inner wall being built? Ruth asked. Part of it. What did Charles say was going behind it? He didn't say. Did you ask? Yes. He told me it was for farm supplies that needed stable temperature. Those were his words? Something like that. Why didn't you tell me? I assumed you knew. I didn't. Kathy picked up one cultivation tray and examined the numbered end. I thought it was obsolete stuff. Seed sacks, drying trays, whatever he didn't use anymore. That's why I told Eric to leave the door. I didn't want him wasting time trying to open it. You knew Charles built a separate room and still valued the house as if the cellar held nothing. It might hold nothing. Then why did you keep this from me after Sherry came? I didn't keep it from you. You never asked until now. The answer was too close to Ruth's own habits. Charles had worked within sight of her, and she hadn't asked what the labels meant. Kathy had seen the door installed and decided the answer didn't matter. The family had grown used to leaving certain questions alone until money gave them urgency. Did you see where he kept the key? Ruth asked. No. Did Eric? I doubt it. Then that is all I needed. Kathy put down the tray. You're treating me like a witness. Today, you are one. I'm your daughter. That doesn't make what you saw less useful. It should make me more than useful. Ruth looked at her. What do you want me to say? That you still trust me. I trusted you with my house key. And I made a bad decision. You made several. Kathy stepped outside the unit, then came back. I can't spend every week driving you to treatment, collecting your medicine, buying groceries, and then be told I have no place in decisions. I didn't say you have no place. You don't tell me anything. When I told you I wasn't selling, you kept the showing. Because I thought you were scared. I was clear. Kathy's eyes filled, but her voice stayed even. Then, maybe you should arrange your own rides for a while. Gary turned toward the trailer. He had no wish to stand inside a family exchange, but leaving Ruth alone in it felt worse. He settled for carrying the repaired coffee grinder outside. Ruth felt the cost of Kathy's sentence immediately. The medical transport service required advanced scheduling. Rides could arrive early or late. After treatment, waiting 40 minutes in the cold would be difficult. Ruth also understood what Kathy was asking. Trust me with control, or lose the care that comes with it. All right, Ruth said. Kathy stared at her. I'll arrange my rides. That isn't what I meant. It's what you said. I meant I need to know you respect what I do. I do. I don't respect what you did to my house. Kathy wiped under one eye with her thumb. You make it sound like there's no difference. I'm trying to keep the difference clear. Kathy left without helping load the trailer. Ruth bent to lift one end of a box. A cramp tightened through her side so sharply that she had to set it down. Gary came back at once. Sit. I'm fine. Sit while being fine. She lowered herself onto Charles's chair. Her breathing settled after a minute. Gary handed her a bottle of water, then remembered her fluid restriction and stopped. Sorry, one swallow is all right. He opened it and passed it to her. Ruth drank, then checked the time. They had searched less than half the unit. We keep going, she said. No, we take the trays, tools, papers, and key. The rest can wait until after treatment. It may rain tonight. The boxes are dry here. The cellar isn't. Which is why we need to brace it before the rain. Ruth disliked stopping, but his order made sense. They loaded the selected items and locked the unit. At the house, Gary carried the lumber to the cellar. Ruth sorted the recovered papers at the kitchen table. Most were bills and equipment instructions. Several catalog pages had circles around Chile varieties. In the margin of one, Charles had written, "Too much water. Weak in heat." Another carried a note to compare germination after long storage. Ruth put those pages in the conservancy binder. They supported the history of his work, but proved no ownership and no living seed. Outside, Gary cut 2 upright braces and fixed them beside the iron frame without touching the lock. Ruth held the lantern and passed him screws. The lower hinge stopped shifting when he tested the door gently. That protects it, he said. It doesn't open it? Ruth took the iron key from her pocket. "Should we see if this fits?" Gary looked at the key, then at the damp wall. Sherry said, "Witnesses and a plan." "I know. You decide." Ruth closed her fingers around it. "Not today." Gary packed his drill. "Good." Rain began before dark. Water ran through the cleared channel instead of soaking into the cellar's slope. Ruth checked it twice from beneath an umbrella. The plastic held. Inside, she called the clinic and arranged transport for her next 4 treatments. Pickup windows were longer than Kathy's drive, and each round trip required a small fee. Ruth wrote the times on a calendar. Then she opened her banking information. If she paid the delinquent taxes that night, her savings would no longer cover the full roof estimate she had received by telephone. She could pay part of the repair and hope for time, or she could protect the house from the county deadline and live beneath temporary plastic. She paid the taxes. The confirmation appeared on the screen. Ruth printed it on the small printer Charles had kept beside the household files. The machine shook and made a grinding sound, but it produced one clear page. She placed the receipt behind the tax notice. The money was gone. So was the immediate risk of losing the property for that debt. Retreat had become more expensive because Ruth had chosen the house before knowing what stood behind the iron door. She called Sherry. "I found cultivation trays, supply notes, and a key that may belong to the chamber," Ruth said. "Did you open it?" "No." "Is the frame stable?" Gary braced it. "And the moisture?" "We cleared the drainage. It's raining now, and I'm checking." Sherry asked her to photograph the notes and trays. Ruth sent the images. "These are consistent with preservation work," Sherry said after reviewing them. "They still don't tell us what survived." "I understand. Then what do you want to do next?" Until that question, Ruth had believed the next step was proving the seeds were valuable enough to save the house. The tax receipt changed that. So did Kathy's memory of Charles building the room. So did the cultivation trays rescued from beneath paint cans. "I want to preserve whatever he meant to preserve," Ruth said, "even if your agreement never happens." Sherry was silent for a moment. "That changes how we proceed." "How?" "We document everything before opening. We protect the record, not just the material that might sell." "When can you come back?" "After the outer cellar remains dry through this rain. I'll also need to review our complete file on Charles." Ruth looked at the key beside the blue stoneware bowl. "What about ownership?" "We look for proof, without assuming the answer." After the call, Ruth checked the drainage again. The channel carried water safely toward the lower ground. The cellar door remained locked, the frame held, and the vent cap stayed clear. She returned to the kitchen and wrote 3 words at the top of Sherry's list. Preserve before value. She tore a sheet from the household notebook and made 4 columns. Item, location found, condition, photograph. The sealed jar became the first entry. The cultivation trays came next, followed by Charles's supply list, the catalog notes, the iron key, and the loose metal tag. Ruth took pictures in morning light. She placed a ruler beside the key and photographed both sides. She did not try it in the lock. At 7:30, the medical transport driver called from the road. "I'm by a green mailbox," he said. "That's Gary's gate. Mine is the next one." The van arrived 8 minutes later. Ruth locked the house and checked the new list in her purse before getting in. The ride to the clinic took longer than Kathy's usual route because another patient had to be collected. Ruth reached her chair on time, though barely. Kathy sent a message while the machine was running. "Do you need me to pick you up?" Ruth answered. "I have a ride arranged," Kathy replied with a thumbs-up symbol. Ruth knew her daughter used that symbol when she had more to say and had decided against saying it. During treatment, Ruth called the storage office and asked what was required to move the unit into her name. The clerk said Kathy would need to release it, or Ruth could rent a second unit and transfer the belongings. Ruth did not call Kathy. She reserved a smaller unit across the aisle and paid 1 month. The next morning, Gary brought the trailer, and they moved the remaining boxes from Kathy's unit into Ruth's. The work took 3 trips. Ruth did not lift the heavy furniture. She checked labels, directed the order, and kept an inventory. Gary tied down each load. By noon, every item was either in Ruth's unit or on the trailer for the house. Kathy received the cancellation notice after the old unit was emptied. She called while Ruth was locking the new door. "You moved everything?" "Yes." "You could have asked me to release the account. I had a way that didn't require asking." "That cost you another month. It costs less than not having control." Kathy breathed into the phone. Did you find the key? I found several things. That means yes. It means I found several things. Mom, I'm not Eric. You don't have to hide information from me. I'm documenting it before discussing it. With Sherry, with everyone. Am I included in everyone? You will receive the same information Eric receives. Kathy took that as a demotion. Ruth meant it as a boundary. I saw the door being built, Kathy said. Doesn't that matter? It matters enough that I wrote down what you told me. You wrote it down. Yes. Like a statement? Like a fact I don't want confused later. Kathy gave a short, unhappy laugh. You really don't trust me. I trust you to remember what you saw. I don't trust you to make decisions about my property. The words left no space for Kathy to rearrange them. What am I supposed to do with that? She asked. Find the table. Ruth ended the call and turned the new key in the storage lock. The deliberate plan worked. Her belongings were no longer held under Kathy's name, and access did not depend on anyone's schedule. It also left Ruth responsible for every payment, every trip, and every box still waiting to be moved. Back at the house, Gary carried the cultivation trays into the front room. Ruth cleared one wall and laid clean plastic across the floor. I want temporary shelving here, she said. For opening the chamber? For anything that needs dry storage. Gary measured the wall. You could use the dining room. This is the dining room. He looked around the empty space. Right. The absence of the table had changed how the room looked even to him. They built shelves from sealed boards resting on sturdy blocks. Nothing touched the adobe wall. Ruth tested each shelf with both hands. Gary placed a small level on the top board. Close enough, he said. Level is level. Charles used to say that. He was right, too. Gary adjusted one block until the bubble centered. Ruth washed the cultivation trays with a dry brush, then set them on the lower shelf. The conservancy binder and inventory notebook went into a lidded plastic box above them. The room did not have a table, but it had a function again. In the afternoon, they checked the root cellar. The clear drainage had worked. The outer wall remained cool, but the moisture reading had dropped. The braces held the iron frame square. Gary tested the outer wooden door. This lock has been picked at by weather for 28 years, he said. Can we replace it? The hasp, too. Ruth bought a steel hasp and a weatherproof padlock at the hardware store. Gary removed the old hardware. Ruth filled the worn screw holes with wooden plugs, then drove the new screws herself. She gave no spare key to Kathy or Eric. One stayed on her ring. The other went into the zippered section of her treatment bag. When the new lock snapped shut, Ruth pulled it twice. The outer door held. Gary wrote the new moisture reading in her inventory notebook. Who gets to open this now? He asked. I do. That's the correct answer. Ruth called Sherry from the kitchen. She described the lower moisture reading, the repaired drainage, the frame braces, and the new outer lock. Send me photographs of the whole cellar, Sherry said. Start at the entrance and move clockwise. Don't skip the floor. Sherry called back an hour later. The outer room looks stable enough for an inspection visit, she said. I'm still reviewing Charles's file. What did you find? Repeated references to a reserve set, but no inventory of what he placed there. Our copy of his accession record ends before the private storage entries. So, the register behind the door may be the only complete one, if it exists. Ruth accepted the correction. What will you bring when we open it? Sample envelopes, seals, gloves, temperature and moisture meters. I'll document each container before moving it. If we find seed, I'll take a limited sample only after ownership and permission are addressed. I give permission. You can give permission to enter your cellar. We still need to see whether Charles left any direction about the collection. Ruth looked at the iron key on the kitchen table. I want everyone who might dispute what happens there. That includes your children? Yes. Are you comfortable with them present? Comfort isn't the same as usefulness, Sherry understood. A witnessed opening protects the record, she said. No one can later say material was added, removed, or described incorrectly. When? I can return early next week. But I want one more dry reading after the rain, and I need time to bring our independent registry copy. Ruth checked her treatment schedule. Tuesday is dialysis, Wednesday morning, Wednesday at 10. Ruth wrote it on the calendar. She did not ask Kathy and Eric whether the time suited them. She sent the same message to each. The inner cellar door will be inspected Wednesday at 10 in the morning. Sherry Singh and Gary Webb will be present. You may attend as witnesses. No one has permission to enter the cellar or handle the key before then. Kathy called within 2 minutes. What do you mean, witnesses? You saw the door installed. Sherry needs an accurate record. Does Eric know? He received the same message. Do you have the key? I have a key that may fit. Where did you find it? With Charles's tools. Which tools? The ones from storage. I packed those boxes. Yes. Kathy heard the point. Who decides what happens if there are seeds? She asked. That depends on what we find and what Charles left in writing. So, Sherry is expecting paperwork. She is expecting to document the room. Can I see the Conservancy file before Wednesday? No. Why not? Because it belongs to the Conservancy. I mean your copy. You can see it Wednesday. Kathy lowered her voice. Eric is going to make this difficult. That is Eric's choice. You know how he gets when money is involved. I know how both of you get when you think a decision is already made. Kathy did not respond. I will be there, she said finally, just I expected you would. After the call, Ruth returned the iron key to the zippered pocket in her treatment bag. The new cellar key remained on her house ring. Eric did not answer the message until evening. His reply contained 3 lines. Do not open anything without me. Dad's property belongs to his heirs. I want copies of every document before Wednesday. Ruth printed his message and placed it in the inventory binder. Then she wrote the date and time beneath it. The strategy was simple now. Nothing would be opened privately. Nothing would be moved without being listed. No family member would receive separate information or special access. The plan worked once that day. Ruth had recovered control of her belongings, stabilized the cellar, and set a witnessed inspection on her own terms. By nightfall, both Kathy and Eric knew the date, the room, the likely key, and the name of the only person prepared to judge what might be found. At 9 the next morning, Sherry called. I received an email from Eric, she said. What did he tell you? That Charles's seed work may belong to 3 heirs and that you're preparing to open the chamber without resolving ownership. 3 heirs? You, Kathy, and Eric. Did he send proof? No. He asked us to postpone Wednesday. Ruth stood at the kitchen window. Gary was outside clearing windblown branches from the acequia path. Are you postponing? I need to separate 2 things. You control access to your cellar. The Conservancy does not. But we cannot discuss an agreement while ownership is openly disputed. You already told me that. Now I have a written claim from someone else. Eric didn't care about those seeds until he heard your name. That may be true. It doesn't remove the claim. What does? Proof that Charles assigned the rights, or a clear agreement among the possible heirs. If neither exists, we would need the ownership question resolved before licensing. Ruth pressed her thumb against the edge of the counter. Can you still document the opening? Not as the person directing it. I can attend as an observer and protect any samples you authorize me to take, but I won't decide who receives them until we see ownership proof. Eric wants the door left closed. His email says that. What do you say? I say opening and ownership are different questions. It is your property. If the chamber is at risk, documenting its contents may be the responsible thing. That decision is yours. Ruth heard what Sherry would not do. She would not give permission, take responsibility, or stand between Ruth and her children. Did Kathy contact you? There was a pause. She called yesterday. What did she say? She asked whether we had procedures for working with an older person undergoing medical treatment. Ruth closed her eyes. She wanted to know if I could make decisions. She said you become tired after dialysis and sometimes delay paperwork. I told her your medical care was not relevant to my conversation with you. Did she say she manages my affairs? She said she helps manage appointments and household matters. She used to. I asked whether she had written authority. She said no. Ruth opened her eyes again. Why didn't you tell me yesterday? I wanted to speak after I received Eric's email. Together, they create an issue I can't ignore. What issue? Not your competence. Family pressure around something that may have commercial value. The distinction mattered, but it did not undo what Kathy had done. Will you come Wednesday? Yes, if you still want me there. I do. Then I'll bring the registry copy and preservation materials. I will not bring an agreement. Ruth looked at the temporary shelves in the dining room. She had built a safe place for material the Conservancy might not touch. Bring what protects the seeds, she said. I will. After the call, Ruth printed Eric's email from the copy Sherry forwarded. Eric had written that Charles's children were concerned An outside organization might remove family property while Ruth was medically vulnerable. The sentence reduced Ruth to a doorway someone else needed to guard. She placed the page in the binder and called Kathy. "I want you at the house. I'm working." "Then come after." "What happened?" "You called Sherry about my medical treatment." Kathy did not deny it. "I'll come at 5. Ruth spent the day preparing without her daughter's help. She and Gary checked the cellar braces, photographed the drainage channel, and wrote the latest moisture reading beside the earlier ones. The number had fallen again. Gary read Eric's email at the kitchen table. "He makes it sound like Sherry came with a truck," he said. "He makes it sound like I didn't invite her." "What are you going to do?" "Open the door Wednesday. Sherry's still coming?" As an observer, Gary handed back the page. "And me?" "You repaired the frame. You recognize Charles's work habits. I want you there. Then I'll be there." Ruth took out the iron key. "Before Wednesday, I need to know whether this is the right key. Trying it could turn the lock." "Can we test it without opening?" Gary considered that. "We can see whether it enters. We don't have to turn it." They went to the cellar. Ruth unlocked the new outer padlock. Inside, Gary held the lantern while she approached the iron door. The key entered halfway, then stopped. Ruth withdrew it. "Wrong key?" "Maybe dirt in the lock," Gary said. "Maybe the ward needs the key held at an angle." "Can you clean it?" "Without picking it apart, yes." He used a narrow brush and a hand blower, then collected the loosened dust on a sheet of paper. He did not add oil. Charles had used graphite on dry locks, and oil could hold grit. Ruth tried again. The key entered fully. She felt the weight of the lock through the metal. One turn might answer the question. It might also open the door before the room was documented. She pulled the key out. "It fits," she said. "It fits the opening," Gary corrected. "We don't know if it turns. That is enough today." They locked the outer door and returned to the house. At 5:12, Kathy knocked. Ruth let her stand on the porch while she finished writing a line in the inventory notebook. Then she opened the door. Kathy carried a manila envelope. "I brought the release from the old storage unit. It's already empty, I know. This closes the account." Ruth took the envelope. "Come in." Kathy stopped in the dining room when she saw the shelves, cultivation trays, sealed plastic boxes, and the inventory binder. "You did all this?" "Gary built the shelves with me. This looks like a business. It looks like a clean place to set things down." Kathy removed her coat. "Is Sherry coming?" "Wednesday?" "Yes." Eric said she canceled. She paused any business discussion. "She didn't cancel the inspection. I was trying to protect you by asking a stranger if I could make decisions. That isn't what I asked." Ruth took the printed email and laid it on the empty kitchen counter. "I spoke to her." Kathy read the first paragraph, then stopped. "I didn't say you were incompetent. You gave her my treatment schedule. I said you get tired. She knows what dialysis means. I was worried they were offering you something before anyone checked it. They haven't offered me anything. You mentioned $210,000. Ruth looked at her sharply. "I never said that to you." Kathy's face changed. Eric did. "How did Eric know?" "He said he looked up conservancy programs. The amount isn't on the website." Kathy glanced toward the binder. Ruth understood. "When you brought groceries, you read Sherry's letter. It was on the counter. The letter didn't contain that amount." "No, but her card was there. I called and asked what kind of programs they run. The person who answered mentioned a funded licensing project. The amount had moved through the family without Ruth speaking it. Kathy had called. Eric had searched. Each had gathered enough to believe the chamber held money, though neither knew whether it held seed. "You told Eric," Ruth said. "I told him there might be a funded project. He found the figure somewhere else. And then he claimed the collection. He is Charles's son." That didn't stop him from selling Charles's chair. Kathy sat down at the counter. He brought back some jars. "Where are they?" "In his garage." "Why didn't he bring them here?" "He wants everyone to agree before returning anything." Ruth stared at her. "My property is not his bargaining tool. He says the jars may be evidence." "Of what?" "That he didn't throw everything away. He took them from my cellar. The crew took them, on his instructions." Kathy folded her hands. "He wants a written agreement that nothing will be signed without both of us." "There is nothing to sign." "Not yet." The words sounded like Kathy's earlier answer about the house sale. Ruth had canceled one plan only to find herself facing another. "What do you want?" Ruth asked. "I want you to let me manage contact with the Conservancy." "No, I know contracts." I handle vendor agreements at work. This is not your work. You could lose money because you're angry with me. I could lose my rights because you think helping means speaking for me. I'm trying to keep Eric from making a mess. Then tell him to return the jars. He won't listen unless he has some protection. Protection from his mother? Protection from being shut out. Ruth leaned against the counter. Her legs felt steady, but the conversation left a heavier kind of tiredness. If Charles intended those seeds for all of us, the proof will say so, she said. And if there's no proof, then we deal with what exists, not what Eric demands before seeing it. Kathy shook her head. You always trusted Dad's judgment more than ours. Charles didn't empty my house during treatment. That isn't fair. It happened. I said I was wrong. You said you were scared. I was both. Ruth waited. Kathy looked toward the dark window. I thought if I got everything arranged, you'd be angry for a while, and then relieved. There it was. Not an apology, but the shape of the decision. You believed I would come around, Ruth said. I believed you needed somewhere safe. You believed needing treatment meant I would eventually stop objecting. Kathy's silence confirmed it. Ruth moved the inventory binder away from her. Wednesday remains scheduled. You and Eric may watch. Neither of you may handle anything without my permission. Sherry will record what is found. Gary will help with the door. And if Eric refuses those rules, he stays outside. He may take that as proof you're hiding something. He can think what he wants. What about the jars? Tell him to bring them Wednesday, sealed and untouched. Kathy stood. If he brings them, will you include them in the inventory? Yes. Will Sherry examine them? If she believes they matter. Will you give us copies of the inventory and observations? Yes. Kathy studied Ruth. Why? Because a complete record protects everyone. It does not give everyone control. That was the price Ruth was willing to pay. She would not keep the chamber private. She would expose whatever Charles had left to the same two people who had cleared the outer shelves. She would give them copies, let them witness every jar, and accept that they might challenge what they saw. In return, the record would not depend on family memory. Kathy put on her coat. I'll tell Eric. Don't negotiate for me. Give him the rules. After she left, Ruth called Sherry and explained the missing jars, Eric's demand, and the conditions she had set. Do you still want to proceed? Sherry asked. Yes. If the chamber contains assignment papers, everyone will see them. Yes. If it contains nothing, everyone will see that too. Ruth looked at the iron key lying beside the binder. Yes. She wrote a revised notice and sent the same copy to Kathy, Eric, Gary, and Sherry. The opening would be documented. All recovered jars had to be returned. No one would remove material. Commercial discussion would wait until ownership and condition were known. Eric replied that he would attend and bring the jars. The earlier advantage of quiet control was gone. The chamber had become a family claim before anyone knew what it held. Ruth accepted that exposure because the only proof strong enough to matter had to survive everyone watching it appear. The next treatment left Ruth with a cramp in her right calf and a headache that followed her home in the transport van. She ate soup, checked the cellar drainage, and went to bed before 8. Kathy called twice. Ruth answered the second time. Eric says the cleanout man only had 9 jars left, Kathy said. Are they sealed? They're empty. Then he can bring them as they are. He thinks you'll accuse him of replacing them. I'll record what he brings. Can you say you don't believe he stole seeds? I don't know what was taken. Mom, I know he sold my furniture and kept the money. I know he ordered things removed from the cellar. I don't know whether any of those things held seed. Kathy lowered her voice. He's afraid you're going to use this to cut us off. From what? Everything. Ruth sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her heel against the floor until the cramp eased. I haven't cut either of you off. You changed the locks, on the cellar and the storage unit. The unit was in your name. You keep making it sound reasonable. It is reasonable. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Ruth understood more than Kathy realized. The changed locks were physical proof that the old arrangement had ended. Kathy could no longer enter, collect, arrange, or remove things because she believed the outcome would help. I'm not changing them back, Ruth said. I didn't ask you to. You wanted me to know it hurts. Yes, now I know. Kathy waited for comfort. Ruth did not offer false comfort, but she did not end the call either. Come at 9:30 tomorrow, she said. We'll review the rules before going to the cellar. Eric said 10. He should come at 9:30 too. All right. And Kathy? Yes? Thank you for telling me what you saw when Charles built the wall. Her daughter's breathing changed. You believe me? I believe you saw it. That doesn't mean you know what is behind it. I never said I did. Good. Keep saying exactly that. The next morning, Ruth woke before the alarm. The headache was gone. Her calf still felt tight, so she stretched against the kitchen counter before making coffee. She placed 5 mugs beside the pot. The dining room shelves were clean. Sherry's binder sat in the center, beside Ruth's inventory and the sealed outer jar. The iron key remained in the treatment bag until Ruth checked the zippered pocket herself. Gary arrived first. He carried a tool bag and a narrow wooden wedge. I don't plan to use this, he said, holding up the wedge. It's for keeping the door from swinging if the hinge shifts. Will it shift? It shouldn't. That's why I planned for it. They walked to the cellar before the others arrived. The outer lock showed no damage. Moisture along the wall had fallen again. The braces remained tight. Gary examined the iron lock with the lantern close. Do you remember this key now? Ruth asked. He held it by the tag. I remember the tag. Charles stamped his tool keys, so he knew which hooks they went on. These 2 letters matched the hook under his bench. Does that prove it opens this door? No. But it proves it belonged in the place where he kept work keys. Ruth inserted the key without turning it. Gary watched the shaft settle fully into the lock. Put a little pressure to the right, he said. Not enough to move the bolt. She did. The key met firm resistance, then gave slightly. Gary placed 2 fingers against the outside of the lock housing. The ward accepts it. You're sure? As sure as I can be without retracting the bolt. That removed one uncertainty. The key was not merely an old piece of metal found with Charles's tools. It belonged to the lock. Ruth withdrew it. Nothing else until everyone is here. They returned to the house. Sherry arrived at 9:15 with 2 hard cases, a folding table, and a roll of numbered seals. She wore the same reading glasses on a cord and a plain cotton jacket with the Conservancy emblem above one pocket. She set up the folding table in the dining room. I brought our complete copy of Charles's registry file, she said. The file was thicker than the binder she had brought before. It contained accession forms, letters, field observations, and photographs of chili plants arranged in numbered rows. Ruth stopped at one photograph. Charles stood at the edge of the nursery plot, holding a clipboard. He was thinner than Ruth remembered him from that season. His hat cast shade across his eyes. When was this taken? She asked. Sherry checked the back. During one of our field visits. Ruth did not ask for a year. The picture already carried enough time. Sherry turned to the final registry page. This is where our record ends. Charles noted that later, selections were being held privately while he confirmed stability. Does that mean he owned them? Ruth asked. It means the Conservancy did not own them. Our registry recorded the line, but Charles retained control of his material and commercial rights unless he later assigned them. To whom? That is what we do not know. Eric came in without knocking. The front door had been open for Sherry's equipment, and he treated the opening as permission. He carried a cardboard box. I brought the jars. Ruth pointed toward the porch. Go back outside. What? Then knock. You saw me come in. Go back outside and knock. Eric looked at Gary, then Sherry. He expected one of them to make the request seem unnecessary. Neither did. He carried the box outside. A moment later, he knocked. Ruth opened the door. Come in. Eric stepped past her without speaking and placed the box on the folding table. Those are everything the clean-out guy had. Did he sell or discard others? Ruth asked. He recycled some. He says they were empty. Did you see them? No. Then we record that as his statement, not a fact. Eric looked at Sherry. Is this how the whole day is going to be? Yes, Sherry said. What we see will be recorded as observed. What someone tells us will be recorded as reported. Kathy arrived carrying a folder and the ceramic rooster. You left this at my house, she told Ruth. I thought it was already here. It was. I took it back when I collected your medicines. Ruth accepted it. Thank you for returning it. Kathy set her folder on the counter. I wrote down what I remember about the door. Sherry read the page in silence. Kathy had described Charles ordering insulation panels, fitting the inner frame, and saying he needed stable storage for farm supplies. She made clear that she had never crossed the finished doorway and did not know what had been placed inside. This is useful, Sherry said. Sign and date it. Eric leaned over Kathy's shoulder. You never told me you watched him build it. You never asked. That seems to be everybody's answer. Kathy signed the page. Sherry turned to the box Eric had brought. She photographed it before removing anything. The 9 jars were empty. 3 lids had wax around the edges, but none carried intact labels. 1 jar held a scrap of paper too faded to read. Sherry examined the wax with a magnifier. "These are consistent with storage jars," she said. "I cannot connect any of them to the accession." "So, they don't matter," Eric said. "They matter to the inventory. They don't prove that registered seed was removed." Ruth wrote the result down. The missing jars had troubled her because she could not tell whether the crew had carried away part of Charles's work. The recovered group did not remove every possibility, but it removed the claim Eric had begun making, that he had rescued evidence equal to whatever stood behind the iron door. The only authenticated jar remained the one Ruth found. Eric read the conservancy file while Sherry packed the empty jars into a clean box. He stopped at the final page. "This says Dad retained the commercial rights." "At that time," Sherry said, "then those rights passed to his family. Not necessarily. How else would it work? He could have assigned them. He could have licensed them. They could have remained in his estate. We need evidence." "What if there isn't any?" "Then I won't negotiate until ownership is clear." Eric looked at Ruth. "You could agree now that we each get a third. Before we know what exists?" "It would avoid a fight. It would create an agreement based on your fear." "My fear?" "That Charles made a choice you won't like." Eric pushed the file away. "What choice do you think he made?" "I don't know." "You must think something, or we wouldn't all be here." Ruth looked at the 5 mugs beside the coffee pot. Kathy had taken one. Gary had. Sherry's sat untouched. Eric had not been offered one yet. "The easy choice would be to open the door with Gary and tell you afterward," Ruth said. "I didn't choose that. You could still leave things out. That's why Sherry is documenting. She works for the people who want the seeds. She works for the organization that kept an independent record before any of us knew the seeds might matter." Eric crossed his arms. "If a paper says everything is yours, are you going to use it against us?" Ruth heard the question beneath his question. Would she repay humiliation with exclusion? Would she make him watch a door close because he had emptied rooms without her? She could have said yes and let him sit with it. Instead, she said, "If Charles left valid instructions, I will follow them. I will not destroy a paper, hide a jar, or change the inventory to reward or punish anyone." "What if the instructions are unfair? Then you will know exactly whose choice they were." Kathy looked at Ruth across the counter. She understood that something permanent had already changed. Their mother would no longer soften one person's action to protect another person's feelings. Sherry checked the time. "Before we go down, I need everyone to understand my role. I will document the room and compare any accession material with our registry. Ruth controls entry. I do not decide legal ownership. I do not remove seeds unless the person shown to control them authorizes a sample." "And if the paper names Ruth?" Eric asked. "Then I deal with Ruth. And if it names all of us, then I deal with all of you." Gary drank the last of his coffee and set down the mug. "What if there's no paper? Then the collection remains where it is while ownership is addressed." No one liked that answer, which made it a useful rule. Ruth took the new cellar key from her ring and the iron key from her bag. She gave the inventory binder to Sherry and carried the lantern herself. Outside, the sky was clear after the rain. Water moved quietly through the acequia. The 5 of them crossed the nursery plot in a loose line, each keeping enough distance to avoid speaking. At the outer door, Ruth unlocked the new padlock. "From here forward," Sherry said, "no one touches anything unless Ruth asks." Eric opened his mouth, then closed it. Gary went down first to place the lantern and inspect the braces. Sherry followed with her camera and seals. Kathy descended carefully. Eric came behind her. Ruth entered last and locked the outer door from the inside, so no one could walk in unnoticed. The iron door stood at the back beneath the drive vent. Gary placed the unused wedge on the floor. Sherry opened her registry file on a crate. Ruth stepped to the lock with Charles's key in her hand. Everyone could see the door, her hands, and one another. Whatever the room held would enter the family record in the same moment it entered the light. Eric spoke before Ruth put the key into the lock. "I want my position recorded first." Sherry lifted her pen. "Go ahead. If there are seeds in there, they came from Dad's work. Dad is gone. Kathy and I are his children. Mom owns the house, but that doesn't mean she owns everything he ever developed." Kathy looked at him. "You're speaking for yourself. You said the same thing. I said ownership should be documented. You said we shouldn't be shut out. That isn't the same." Eric turned back to Sherry. My point is, whatever is behind that door belongs to the family, unless there's a valid document saying otherwise. Nobody should make a deal without all three of us. Sherry wrote his statement exactly as he gave it. Is that complete? She asked. Yes. Kathy asked for the pen. I remember Charles building this room, she said. He called it storage for farm supplies. I never saw what he put inside, and I don't claim that I did. I believe Ruth should have help managing anything valuable because of her treatment schedule, but I don't know who owns the seed rights. Ruth heard the care in Kathy's wording. Her daughter had stopped just short of claiming incapacity while placing the idea into the record. Sherry handed the pen to Ruth. I own the house and control access to this cellar, Ruth said. I don't know what is behind the door. If Charles left instructions, I intend to follow them. Gary signed only as a witness to the condition of the door, frame, and key. Sherry dated the page. Now we open it, she said. Ruth inserted the iron key. It went in fully. She turned it to the right. The key moved a quarter turn and stopped. Eric shifted behind her. Don't force it, Gary said. I'm not. Lift the handle slightly while you turn. Ruth raised the handle. The weight came off the old bolt. The key moved again with a dry metal scrape. A heavy latch withdrew inside the door. No one spoke. Ruth pulled. The seal around the frame held for a moment, then released with a low, sucking sound. Cold, dry air moved into the outer cellar. It carried the smell Ruth had noticed beneath the threshold: paper, wood, dust, and dried chili skin. Gary set the wedge under the door after it opened. The repaired frame remained square. Sherry photographed the entrance before anyone crossed it. The chamber was narrow, but deeper than the outer cellar. Insulation panels lined the walls behind painted wood. Shelves reached from floor to ceiling on both sides. Sealed jars stood in numbered rows. Some were brown glass, others were clear and wrapped in paper. Each had a waxed lid and a white accession label in Charles's handwriting. Small metal containers held folded packets. Cultivation trays were stacked beneath the lowest shelf. A wooden register box sat on a central work surface. Above it, protected beneath a clear cover, hung a notarized document. Ruth saw her name before she understood the rest. Eric saw it too. Wait, he said. No one had moved. Sherry took photographs from the threshold. She recorded the shelf numbers, the temperature, and the moisture reading. Both were within the range she had hoped to find. The chamber stayed dry, she said. Ruth stepped inside first. The room was just wide enough for her to turn between the shelves. Charles had fitted labels to everything. On the work surface lay his reading glasses, an old pencil, and a cotton cloth folded into a square. Ruth touched nothing. Sherry entered after her. Gary remained at the door. Kathy and Eric watched from the outer room. Photograph the document where it hangs, Ruth said. Sherry did. The heading read, Assignment of Seed Collection and Rights. The language beneath it was direct. Charles identified the registered Chimayo, Chile line by its accession marks. He assigned the physical collection, breeding records, propagation authority, and commercial licensing rights solely to Ruth Vaughn. The signature was Charles's. A notary's seal and signature appeared below it. The document had been completed before Charles died. Ruth read it twice. Charles had not left her a message about gratitude or loyalty. He had left instructions about work. Kathy leaned nearer without crossing the threshold. Is that original? It appears to be, Sherry said. I need to examine it without removing it from the cover. Eric pointed toward the notary seal. That doesn't prove he understood what the collection might be worth. No, Ruth said. It proves what he decided to do with it. He may have meant for you to hold it for the family. The paper doesn't say that. You haven't read all of it. Ruth had. Sherry photographed each paragraph, then opened the clear cover with Ruth's permission. The document was fixed to a backing board at four corners, not hidden behind anything. Charles had mounted it where the first person entering the chamber would have to see it. Sherry checked the seal, signature, paper, and accession numbers. The accession references match our registry, she said. Charles's signature matches his filed correspondence. The notarization is complete. Are you a lawyer now? Eric asked. No, I'm telling you what the Conservancy will rely on. This assignment directs us to deal with Ruth as the owner of the name, collection, and rights. You said you wouldn't decide ownership. I'm not deciding a dispute for a court. I'm deciding whether our organization has clear written authority to negotiate. We do. Eric looked at Kathy. She did not support him. Sherry turned toward Ruth. "Do I have your permission to inspect the register?" "Yes." The wooden box was not locked. Inside lay a thick ledger wrapped in cloth. Sherry lifted it onto the work surface and opened the first page. Charles's accession marks matched the independent registry copy. The early entries repeated information Sherry already had. The later pages continued beyond the point where the Conservancy's file ended. There were planting dates, irrigation intervals, germination counts, pod measurements, drying times, and storage locations. Charles had recorded which rows failed and which survived. The final pages listed the chamber shelves and jar numbers. Sherry compared the first listed jar with its shelf position. It was there. She checked the last listed jar. It was there too. "The register accounts for the collection," she said. "How much?" Eric asked. "How much seed? How much money?" "Money comes after viability." Eric laughed once without humor. "Of course it does." Ruth looked along the shelves. The jars were not a pile of treasure. They were years of repeated work arranged in rows. Charles had saved failures in small packets and successful selections in larger jars. Nothing in the room suggested luck. Sherry asked Ruth to choose whether sampling should begin. "What happens if we leave everything sealed?" Ruth asked. "We preserve the collection but learn nothing about viability." "And if you sample?" "I open selected jars under record, remove a small number of seeds, reseal them, and divide the sample. One set stays here. One goes into a controlled germination tray." "How many jars?" "Enough to represent early, middle, and final selections." "Not every jar." Ruth looked at Eric and Kathy. "Any objection to that method?" Eric folded his arms. Would it matter? It would be recorded. He looked at the mounted assignment again. "No objection to testing," he said. Kathy shook her head. "No objection." Gary signed the sampling sheet as witness. Sherry selected 6 jars from different stages in the register. She photographed each seal, opened it, counted the sample, and closed it with a numbered Conservancy seal. Ruth initialed every line. The seeds looked dry and intact. That proved nothing by itself. Sherry placed half the samples into labeled packets for the Conservancy. The other half went into a clear germination tray lined with prepared paper. "We can start these here," she said. "The temperature must stay steady." "The kitchen is warm," Ruth said. "Not steady enough overnight. I have a seed mat from storage." Gary nodded. "We brought it back with the trays." They carried the germination tray to the dining room. Ruth set Charles's old heat mat on the temporary shelf. It still worked. Sherry tested the temperature and adjusted it with a simple controller from her case. The chamber was locked again after every jar, page, and tool had been inventoried. Ruth kept the iron key. For 8 days, the clear tray remained on the dining room shelf. Ruth checked it morning and evening without lifting the lid. Sherry checked by video call. Gary came by to read the temperature when Ruth was at dialysis. Kathy asked for daily updates. Ruth sent the same photograph to her and Eric every second day. On the 4th morning, 1 pale root emerged. By evening, there were 7. More followed over the next several days. Not every seed opened, but every sampled stage produced growth. Sherry returned on the 8th day. Kathy, Eric, and Gary came at the same time, as the signed procedure required. The 5 of them stood around the folding table while Sherry counted the seedlings. She compared the sample numbers with Charles's register and the Conservancy's independent copy. The marks aligned. The stored sequence continued the same drought selection works recorded in the earlier file. "These are viable," she said. "The germination rate is strong for material stored this long." "And the traits?" Ruth asked. "The register's recorded traits match the accession descriptions we hold. Full field confirmation comes during propagation, but the identity and continuity of the line are supported." Eric stared at the thin green shoots. "So, the agreement is real." "The Conservancy is prepared to proceed," Sherry said. "With all of us?" "With Ruth." Kathy sat down in the nearest chair. She looked from the seedlings to the copy of Charles's assignment. For weeks she had treated the adobe as a burden Ruth could not manage. Now the empty dining room held a living collection, a complete register, and written instructions that left management to the woman Kathy had tried to move out. Eric touched neither the tray nor the papers. "What does this mean for us?" he asked. Ruth closed the inventory binder. "It means you ask me before you touch anything in my house." Eric looked at the floor. "You're enjoying this?" "No, You made me knock on the door. You made everybody watch you open the cellar. Now you get to tell us we were wrong. You were wrong before the door opened. Kathy spoke quietly. Eric, no. She wants us to admit Dad trusted her, and not us. Ruth placed the iron key beside the inventory binder. Charles assigned the collection to me. That is what the paper says. It doesn't say why. We worked in that garden too. You complained every time he asked. I was young. So was Kathy. She still remembered the door. Kathy looked at the seedlings. Remembering didn't make me right. Eric pushed back from the table. You both decided where this was going before I arrived. No, Ruth said. Charles decided where the rights went before he died. And you're not giving us anything. I haven't received anything. You will. That still doesn't make it yours. Eric looked toward Sherry. How soon does she get paid? Sherry closed the registry file. I discussed terms with Ruth. Right. He picked up his jacket. What about the money from my furniture? Ruth asked. I said I'd repay it. When? When I can. You had a week before you thought the seeds were valuable. You didn't repay anything. I have debts. So do I. Not anymore. The assumption came easily to him. Money behind one door had erased the roof, the storage charges, the tax payment, the medical transport fees, and the work required to keep the collection alive. Ruth opened the household notebook. You owe $700 from the furniture sale. You also owe whatever it costs to recover the table and cabinet. I don't have that. Then start with the $700. And if I don't? You don't enter the house without an invitation. You don't enter the cellar at all. You can't keep me out of my childhood home. I can keep you out of my present home. Eric waited for Kathy to object. She didn't. He left without saying goodbye. Gary watched through the window as Eric's car turned onto Mora Road. He'll cool down, he said. Maybe. You don't sound convinced. He cools down when someone else pays. Ruth covered the germination tray and returned it to the warm shelf. Kathy remained at the counter. I'm sorry, she said. Ruth looked at her. I'm sorry I emptied the house. I'm sorry I called Sherry about your treatment. I thought if I explained how tired you get, she would slow things down until I could understand them. You thought she would put you between us. Yes. That's not help. I know. You know now? Kathy nodded. The apology did not bring back the cabinet or refill the rooms. It did not return the days Ruth had spent proving she could speak for herself. What can I do? Kathy asked. Find the table. I found the dealer, and he sold it to a couple outside Santa Fe. They use it in their breakfast room. Ruth pictured strangers eating at the place where Charles had sorted seed packets and Eric had cut the roast too soon. Do they know it was sold without permission? The dealer told them after I called. They're willing to return it. For how much? $1,100. Eric received $700 for the whole lot. I know. I'm not paying $1,100 for my own table. You won't. Kathy had brought a checkbook in her folder. She wrote the amount and tore out the check. I'll pay it. That doesn't settle everything. I know. Don't make arrangements to deliver it without asking. Kathy stopped with the check in her hand. When would you like it delivered? Saturday morning, if they agree. I'll ask. And the cabinet? The dealer still has it. He wants $300. That comes from Eric's debt. If he won't pay, then it stays there until he does. Kathy tucked the check into an envelope. For once, she carried out exactly the task Ruth gave her and did not add another. Sherry returned the following afternoon with the proposed agreement. She sat with Ruth at the kitchen counter while Gary repaired the cracked cultivation tray in the dining room. Kathy and Eric had not been invited. The total commitment is $210,000, Sherry said. Part is paid when the agreement is signed. The rest comes in stages as material is propagated and verified. How long? 3 growing seasons. So this isn't selling jars and walking away. No. The Conservancy receives propagation and licensing rights under the program. You retain ownership of the mother collection. You agree to preserve the register, maintain secure storage, and approve reasonable sampling. Who comes onto the property? Only staff or growers scheduled through us, and only with your permission. I want that written plainly. Sherry made the change. Ruth read every page. When she became tired, she stopped. Sherry drank coffee and waited. No one told Ruth where to sign. The agreement included funds for safe storage, nursery preparation, and the first propagation cycle. It did not require Ruth to perform heavy labor. It did require accurate records and responsible access. Ruth added one more condition. Work here happens around my treatment days. Sherry wrote that into the operating schedule. Anything else? Gary's acequia access cannot be blocked by vehicles or temporary structures. That belongs in the site plan. They walked the property together. Ruth showed Sherry the maintenance gate, the nursery plot, the outer cellar, and the room where the roof still leaked. The back room needs to become dry storage, Sherry said. It needs a roof first. The first payment can cover essential repairs connected to preservation. I choose the repair company. Yes. I approve the price. Yes. Ruth signed. Sherry signed for the conservancy. She did not congratulate Ruth or speak about good fortune. She gave Ruth copies, a payment schedule, and a list of work due before the first propagation delivery. The assignment had secured control. The agreement brought duties. The first payment arrived 4 business days later. Ruth moved part of it into a separate account for taxes, repairs, and nursery costs. The savings she had used to meet the delinquent tax deadline returned to her reserve. She did not treat the balance as spending money. A roofing crew replaced the failed flashing and repaired the wet section above the back room. The electrician returned after the ceiling dried, installed a safe light, and restored the circuit. Gary accepted payment for the lumber, plastic, drainage work, and hours he had already given. I said we settled for coffee, he told Ruth. That was before the work became part of an agreement. I'm not a contractor. You're a man who used his materials and time. He accepted the check after Ruth told him she would mail it if he refused. They wrote a simple schedule for acequia access. Gary would notify Ruth before bringing equipment through the gate. Ruth would keep the path clear. Conservancy vehicles would park away from the ditch. Nothing about their working arrangement needed to become ownership. It needed only to be respected. Kathy brought the table home Saturday morning. The couple from Santa Fe arrived with it in the back of a borrowed truck. Kathy had arranged the time Ruth requested and had asked permission before giving them the address. After they drove away, the table stood on the porch. Kathy and Gary carried it through the front door. Ruth guided one end past the frame. Careful of the left leg, she said. It's been repaired. Kathy looked underneath. Her scratched initials were still there. I forgot I did that. I didn't. They placed the table in the center of the dining room. Its surface had a new mark near one corner, but Charles's dark saucepan ring remained. So did the shallow cut Eric had made. Kathy ran her hand over the wood. I should have known. Ruth did not tell her she should have known the future value of the house or the seeds. That wasn't the failure. You should have asked, she said. Yes. Kathy took a folded paper from her purse. I made a list of the things I removed. I marked what's in storage, what Eric sold, and what I've returned. I may have missed something. Ruth read the first page. This is a start. I can come Tuesday and help move the kitchen boxes. Tuesday is treatment. Wednesday? Call me Wednesday morning. Don't assume. Kathy nodded. Eric did not come with the table. That evening, he transferred $100 to Ruth's account and sent a message saying it was the first payment. He did not apologize. He did not mention the cabinet. Ruth recorded the payment and reduced the balance in the household notebook. She replied with the remaining amount and nothing more. The next morning, she sat at the return table with the nursery schedule, the repair receipts, and Charles's accession register open before her. Warm air moved from the repaired back room, carrying the clean smell of new wood. The house had become more expensive to keep, busier to manage, and impossible for anyone to dismiss as an empty burden. Ruth now had work that would continue whether her children approved of her rules or not. On Wednesday morning, Kathy called at 8:12. Is today still good for the kitchen boxes? Yes. What time? After 10. Do you want me to bring lunch? Bring something for yourself. I have food. Kathy arrived at 10:15 and knocked. She waited on the porch until Ruth opened the door. Which boxes? She asked. Ruth showed her. They worked from the inventory list. Kathy unpacked plates and handed them to Ruth instead of choosing a cupboard. She washed the serving bowls, dried them, and asked where each one belonged. The questions slowed the work. They also kept the kitchen Ruth's. Near noon, Kathy found the missing coffee filter holder, wrapped inside a garage towel. You already replaced this? No. I found it before. Why was it in the garage box? Ask the person who packed it. Kathy put it beside the coffee maker. I was moving too fast. Yes. They ate chicken sandwiches at the return table. Kathy sat over the initials she had scratched beneath it years earlier. After lunch, she lifted the ceramic rooster from the dresser box. Window above the sink. That's where it was. Kathy set it there. She did not straighten the curtains or move the stoneware bowl. Before leaving, she asked, "Do you want me next Wednesday?" "I don't know yet." "All right, call if you do." The following week, the transport van failed to arrive after dialysis. Ruth waited inside the clinic for 35 minutes. Her pressure had dropped near the end of treatment, and the technician did not want her standing outside. Ruth called the transport number. The driver had been sent to the wrong address and would need another hour. She considered waiting. Then she called Kathy. "I need a ride," Ruth said. "I can be there in 20 minutes. Kathy arrived in 18. She took Ruth's bag, then stopped. "Do you want me to carry this?" "Yes." In the car, she asked whether Ruth needed the pharmacy. "Not today." Kathy drove directly to Moore Road. She did not turn toward her own house or suggest Ruth stay overnight. At the front gate, she asked, "Should I come in?" "For coffee." Inside, Ruth sat while Kathy filled the kettle. Her hands were cold, and the room moved slightly when she turned her head too fast. Kathy noticed. "Do you need me to call the clinic?" "No, I need 10 quiet minutes." Kathy sat across from her and gave her 10 quiet minutes. When Ruth felt steady, she told Kathy where the coffee was kept. That help felt different because it had been requested, limited, and accepted without either woman pretending it meant more. The first propagation work began after the back room passed its electrical inspection. New shelves lined one wall. The repaired cultivation trays stood beneath the window. A locking cabinet held the register when Ruth wasn't using it. Sherry brought clean envelopes, printed accession labels, and a schedule for the first grow-out. She handed the schedule to Ruth. "Which days work for planting? Not Tuesday or Thursday? Treatment?" "Yes." "Monday morning?" "Monday morning." No one asked Kathy to confirm. Ruth and Sherry removed only the seed listed for the first stage. They worked at the dining table, one jar at a time. Ruth read each number aloud. Sherry repeated it before filling an envelope. Both signed the sampling line. The mother collection remained in the chamber. Gary repaired the nursery fence and cleared the maintenance gate before a sequoia day. Ruth made coffee as promised and carried it outside in 2 covered mugs. "You said strong," she told him. Gary took 1 sip. "This could remove paint, then keep it away from the new wall." He brought his small tractor through the gate after Ruth unlocked it. They cleared weeds and silt from the shared section. Gary did the heavy digging. Ruth opened debris screens, marked weak banks, and kept the water path clear with a narrow rake. When she tired, she sat on an overturned crate. Gary did not tell her she had done enough. He asked which bank needed checking next. By late afternoon, water ran evenly past the nursery and turned toward his orchard. The trees in the upper rows received the first flow before sunset. Ruth locked the gate after the tractor passed through. Gary returned the key he had used for the equipment chain. "You could keep that one," Ruth said. "I'll ask when I need it. That works." The first chili seedlings rose in the repaired back room. Ruth checked them before breakfast and again after returning from treatment. She recorded temperatures, moisture, and watering amounts in a new ledger beside Charles's old one. She did not copy his handwriting or try to continue his sentences. Her entries were shorter and easier to read. Sherry visited every other week. The Conservancy paid the next scheduled amount after the nursery passed inspection and the first plants established. Ruth approved each expense before money left the project account. The roof no longer leaked. The second wall heater was replaced. The cracked bedroom window received new glass. Ruth kept the old wooden frame because it still closed properly after repair. She brought more belongings home from storage in small loads. Some boxes returned unopened because she knew where they belonged. Others went directly to donation after Ruth, not Kathy, decided she no longer needed their contents. Eric paid $100 the next month. The month after that, he paid nothing. Ruth sent one message showing the balance. She did not call to ask why. 3 weeks later, he arrived at the front door with the pine cabinet strapped into his pickup. He knocked. Ruth opened the door but left the screen latched. "What do you need?" "I brought the cabinet." "How did you get it?" "I paid the dealer." "With what?" "My money." "How much?" "More than he gave me for it." Ruth unlatched the screen. Gary was working near the nursery fence, but Eric did not ask him for help. He carried one end while Ruth guided a furniture dolly beneath the other. "Where do you want it?" Eric asked. "Dining room, far wall." He put it exactly there. The cabinet had a fresh scrape across one side. Eric ran his fingers over it. "I can fix that. Do you know how?" No. Then don't practice on it. He almost argued. Instead, he nodded. I'll find someone who knows. I'll choose who repairs it. You can pay the bill. That's fair. It was the first time he had used that word without asking Ruth to give something up. He looked toward the back door. Can I see the nursery? From the doorway. Not the cellar? No. Eric stood at the nursery doorway and looked at the rows of young plants. They don't look like much. They aren't finished. Do they really use less water? That's what we're testing. He watched Ruth adjust one tray beneath the light. Dad would have liked this. Ruth did not answer for Charles. Before leaving, Eric asked when the local growers would see the plants. In late summer, if the first crop holds. Can I come? You can come when everyone else comes. He accepted that answer, though he didn't like it. His payments resumed the next month. They were irregular, and Ruth recorded every one. The debt remained between them without becoming the only thing between them. By late summer, the nursery plot held long green rows. The plants were not watered carelessly. Ruth and Sherry followed Charles's recorded intervals, then compared the growth with the Conservancy's earlier observations. The pods developed narrow shoulders and deepened from green to red. Several plants struggled. Ruth marked them and did not pretend otherwise. Most held through the dry weeks with less water than the standard rows planted for comparison. Sherry cut one ripe pod at the kitchen table. The wall is thicker than the earlier accession, she said. Charles wrote that in the final register. He was right. Ruth tasted a small piece and reached for her coffee. Still hot. That trait survived. The Conservancy approved the next propagation stage. Local growers began visiting on scheduled afternoons. They signed in at the porch, washed their hands, and entered the nursery with Ruth's permission. Some brought beans, corn, or squash seed to exchange. Others wanted only to see how the chili plants handled dry soil. Ruth explained the watering records without giving speeches. She showed them the weak plants as well as the strong ones. The adobe became busy without becoming public property. Kathy helped set up the first seasonal exchange. She called before coming, carried folding chairs from storage, and asked where Ruth wanted them. When a grower tried to place a table across the acequia path, Kathy moved it only after checking with Ruth. Eric arrived at the stated time. He signed the visitor sheet like everyone else. He carried boxes of empty envelopes into the dining room and did not ask for the cellar key. Gary brought apples from the orchard and placed them in the pine cabinet after Ruth cleared a shelf. At the end of the afternoon, Kathy began stacking cups. Leave 6 out, Ruth said. Gary and Sherry are staying for supper. Kathy set 6 cups beside the sink. Do you want me to stay? Yes. She stayed. The next spring, the shared ditch carried water on schedule. The nursery used its measured portion, and Gary's orchard received the rest. The Conservancy's grower program distributed its first licensed seed under Charles's accession name, with Ruth listed as the collection owner and steward. Ruth continued dialysis. Some mornings, she worked for 3 hours. On others, she watered one tray and returned to bed. The schedule bent around her health without removing her from the work. Her children learned that helping required a question first. Sometimes Kathy still began a sentence with, I already arranged, then stopped and tried again. Sometimes Eric missed a payment. Ruth sent the balance and kept the cellar locked. Neither relationship returned to what it had been. Both became more honest because nobody could enter by pretending permission had already been given. If stories about reclaiming dignity after family abandonment matter to you, subscribe and return for the next inheritance story. That evening, the last growers left with paper packets tucked into coat pockets. Gary closed the maintenance gate on his way to the orchard. Kathy washed the coffee cups and asked where to put them. Eric carried the folding chairs to the shed, then brought the key back to Ruth. She locked the cellar after checking the temperature. The jars stood dry and orderly behind the iron door. Charles's register rested in its cabinet beside her new ledger. Inside, the repaired heaters warmed the adobe. The pine cabinet held clean cups, Gary's apples, and the ceramic rooster on its upper shelf. The dining table carried shallow scratches from old meals and fresh pencil marks from that day's seed work. Ruth switched on the lamp above it. She opened a box of dried chile seed, counted each small group, and wrote the accession number before sealing the paper. Ruth sat at her kitchen table, filling labeled seed envelopes while warm light reached the repaired walls of home.